The night Daniel Hayes found two dying children in the snow, he thought he was saving their lives. He had no idea they would save his. What started as a desperate rescue on Christmas Eve became a journey through darkness, courage, and impossible truth. A story of a broken man, two abandoned girls, and the secret that connected them all. Stay until the end to discover what really happened, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the Christmas Eve blizzard as Daniel Hayes gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the cracked leather. The heater in his 15-year-old sedan barely worked, and his breath fogged the glass despite the groaning fan. In the passenger seat, his 12-year-old son Eli pressed his face against the cold window, watching the world disappear beneath sheets of falling snow. "Dad, can we stop for hot chocolate?" Eli asked, his voice small in the darkness of the car. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd been counting change in his pocket at the gas station 20 minutes ago, barely scraping together enough for half a tank to get them home. Hot chocolate wasn't in the budget. Nothing was anymore. 3 months behind on rent. Electricity bill sitting on the kitchen counter with a red final notice stamp. His wife Sarah's medical bills still arriving 2 years after she'd lost her battle with cancer, each envelope a ghost that haunted their mailbox. "Maybe when we get home, buddy," Daniel said, forcing brightness into his voice that he didn't feel. "I think we have some packets left from last year." Eli didn't respond, just nodded and turned back to the window. The silence between them felt heavy, weighted with all the things Daniel couldn't provide anymore. Christmas used to mean something in their house. Sarah had made sure of that. Lights strung on every surface, cookies baking at midnight, presents stacked under a tree that touched the ceiling. Now their tree sat in the attic, dusty and forgotten, because Daniel couldn't bear to see it without her there to help decorate it. The road ahead curved through the old industrial district on the outskirts of town, a stretch of abandoned warehouses and empty lots where nobody went anymore. Streetlights were few and far between here, their orange glow swallowed by the storm. Daniel squinted through the snow, barely able to see 10 feet ahead. "Dad!" Eli's voice cracked like a gunshot. "Stop!" Daniel's foot slammed the brake. The car fishtailed on the icy road, sliding sideways before jerking to a stop at an angle across both lanes. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What? What is it?" Eli was already fumbling with his seatbelt, pointing frantically at something on the right shoulder. "There, Dad, there are kids out there. I saw them." "Eli, it's probably just—" "No, Dad, I swear, I saw 2 little kids on the ground." Daniel stared into the swirling darkness where his son pointed. Nothing but snow and shadows. The temperature outside had to be well below freezing, the wind chill even worse. No one would be out here, especially not children. It had to be trash bags or abandoned boxes, something the storm had blown into shapes that looked human in the dark. But Eli was already opening his door. "Stay in the car," Daniel ordered, but his son was 12 years old enough to be stubborn, especially after losing his mother had made him grow up too fast. Daniel cursed under his breath and killed the engine, leaving the hazards blinking as he stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Wind screamed through his thin jacket, snow stinging his face like tiny needles. He couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. "Eli, get back in the—" Then he saw them. 2 small shapes huddled against the guardrail, barely visible against the white ground. For a moment, Daniel's mind refused to process what he was seeing. They were too small, too still. Just shadows, just debris, just anything other than what they actually were. But then one of them moved. "Oh God," Daniel breathed, and he was running, his shoes slipping on ice, cold air burning his lungs. Eli was right behind him, gasping. They were children, girls, twins by the look of them. Identical faces, same dark hair matted with ice and snow. 8 years old, maybe 9. They wore summer dresses, thin cotton things with faded flower patterns, no coats, no shoes. Their feet were blue. Their lips were blue. One girl's eyes were closed, her head lolled against her sister's shoulder. The conscious one tracked Daniel's approach with huge, terrified eyes that seemed too large for her emaciated face. "Please," the girl whispered through chattering teeth. "Please help." Daniel dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over them, afraid to touch. afraid he'd hurt them or they'd shatter like ice sculptures. Up close, he could see things that made his stomach turn. Bruises in various stages of healing, purple, yellow, green, painted across their stick-thin arms and legs. Welts on their shoulders. One girl's cheek was swollen, an older injury that had never been properly treated. Their collarbones jutted out so sharply they cast shadows. These children were starving. These children had been beaten. These children were dying right here on this roadside while the world celebrated Christmas. "Eli, get every blanket from the car. Now!" His son sprinted back toward the vehicle. Daniel shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around both girls, trying to create some barrier against the wind. The conscious girl flinched at his touch, a full-body tremor of pure fear. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said, keeping his voice soft, the way he used to when Eli had nightmares. "My name is Daniel. That's my son Eli. We're going to help you, okay? We're going to get you warm." "We don't have any money," the girl whispered. "We tried to find food, but nobody would—" Her voice broke into a cough that shook her whole frame. "Shh, it's okay. You don't need money. Come on, sweetheart. Can you tell me your name?" "Katie." She looked at her unconscious sister. "That's Nora. She stopped talking an hour ago. I think she's really sick." Eli returned with their emergency blanket, the silver thermal one Sarah had insisted they keep in the trunk. Daniel wrapped it around the girls as gently as possible, then scooped up the unconscious one, Nora, in his arms. She weighed nothing. A bag of bones in a dress. Her skin against his hands felt like touching ice, and for a horrible moment he thought he was too late, that she was already gone. But then he felt it, the faintest flutter of breath against his neck. "Eli, help Katie. Support her weight. Don't let her fall." They made it back to the car in seconds that felt like hours. Daniel laid Nora across the back seat, cranked the heater to maximum, even though it would drain what little gas they had. Eli helped Katie into the other side, then climbed into the front. Daniel got behind the wheel, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the ignition. "Dad, shouldn't we call an ambulance?" Eli asked, pulling out his phone. Daniel hesitated, his mind racing through scenarios. Yes, they should call 911. These girls needed immediate medical attention. But there would be questions. Where did he find them? Whose children were they? Why was he taking them in his car? There would be police reports and social services, and the girls would be taken away, put into a system that might send them right back to whoever had done this to them. He'd heard the horror stories. He'd read the news articles about children who fell through the cracks, who begged for help and were sent home anyway, only to end up dead a month later. And more practically, ambulance rides cost thousands of dollars. If his name ended up anywhere on the paperwork, he'd have another bill he couldn't pay. Another crushing weight added to the mountain already burying him. "Just let me get them warm first," Daniel said, pulling back onto the road. "Let me see how bad it is." In the rearview mirror, he watched Katie pull the thermal blanket tighter around herself and her sister. She stared at him with those huge eyes, not quite trusting, not quite believing she was safe. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My house. It's about 15 minutes from here. You're not taking us back?" Something in her voice made Daniel's blood run cold. "Back where, sweetheart?" Katie's face crumpled, and suddenly she looked even younger than 8. "To her. To Aunt Nina. Please don't take us back to her. Please, she'll hurt us worse for running away." Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. "I'm not taking you anywhere near anyone who hurts you, I promise." "Everyone always says they'll help, and then they don't," Katie whispered. "They always send us back." Eli turned around in his seat. "My dad keeps his promises," he said fiercely. "When he says something, he means it. You're safe now." The conviction in his son's voice made Daniel's throat tight. He didn't feel like someone anyone should trust. He was barely keeping his own life together, barely keeping food on the table for Eli, barely keeping the lights on. What right did he have to promise safety to anyone? But looking at those two girls in his mirror, one unconscious and possibly dying, the other watching him with desperate hope warring with learned helplessness in her eyes, Daniel knew he couldn't do anything else. "You're safe," he repeated. "I swear it." The rest of the drive passed in heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the heater fan and Katie's occasional coughs. Daniel kept checking the mirror, watching for signs that Nora was getting worse. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but she didn't wake. Hypothermia, malnutrition, who knew what else? Every medical show he'd ever half-watched with Sarah scrolled through his mind, warnings about rewarming victims too quickly, about organ failure, about a dozen ways these girls could still die even though he'd found them. His neighborhood appeared through the snow, a collection of modest houses with peeling paint and overgrown yards, cars up on blocks, chain-link fences listing at angles. His own house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a small ranch with brown siding and a roof that leaked when it rained hard. Sarah had always talked about fixing it up, painting the trim, planting flowers in the spring. Those plans had died with her. Daniel pulled into the driveway, noting the sad little wreath Eli had hung on the front door, his son's only concession to the holiday. Inside, the house would be cold because he'd turned the thermostat down to 60 to save money. The cupboards would be mostly bare because payday wasn't until after Christmas. The living room would be empty where the tree should stand. "Home sweet home," he muttered, more bitter than he meant it to sound. He carried Nora inside while Eli helped Katie navigate the icy walkway. The girl could barely stand, leaning heavily on Eli's shoulder. Inside, the house felt almost as cold as outside. Daniel kicked the thermostat up to 75. They'd deal with the bill later. And carried Nora to the couch, the same lumpy brown sofa where he'd fallen asleep every night for 2 years because he couldn't bear to sleep in the bed he'd shared with Sarah. "Eli, get more blankets from the closet and fill the bathtub with warm water, not hot, just warm. We need to bring their body temperature up slowly." While his son ran to follow orders, Daniel knelt beside Nora, checking her pulse at her wrist. Thready and fast. Her skin was still ice cold, lips purple, fingernails blue. He rubbed her hands between his, trying to generate friction, trying to will warmth back into her small body. Katie stood in the doorway, swaying on her feet, the thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a silver cape. "Is she going to die?" "No," Daniel said firmly, with more confidence than he felt. "She's going to be fine, but I need to know. Has she eaten anything today?" Katie shook her head. "We found half a sandwich in a trash can yesterday morning. We split it. Before that, I don't remember. Maybe 3 days?" 3 days. These children hadn't eaten in 3 days. Daniel felt rage bubble up in his chest, hot and acidic. What kind of monster did this to kids? What kind of world let it happen? Okay, we're going to fix that. But we have to be careful. Your stomachs aren't used to food right now. If you eat too much too fast, you'll get sick, understand?" Katie nodded, but her eyes had drifted to the kitchen, visible through the doorway. Even from here, Daniel could see her staring at the fruit bowl on the counter, 3 apples starting to wrinkle. Her whole body leaned toward them, hunger evident in every line of her skeletal frame. "After we get you warmed up," Daniel said gently. "I promise." Eli called from the bathroom. "Water's ready?" "Can you walk?" Daniel asked Katie. She nodded and took a step, then her legs buckled. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground, surprised again by how little she weighed. He could feel every rib through the thin dress, every knobby joint of her spine. Carrying her to the bathroom, he wondered how long they'd been living like this. Months? Years? The bathroom was tiny, barely room for the toilet, sink, and tub. Steam rose from the water Eli had drawn, and the boy stood there looking proud and worried at the same time. Daniel set Katie on her feet, steadying her. "I know this is scary, but you need to get in the water to warm up. Can you do that yourself, or do you need help?" Katie's face flushed, the first color he'd seen in her cheeks. "By myself," she whispered. "Okay, we'll be right outside the door. Call if you need anything. And Katie, don't stay in longer than 10 minutes. Your body needs to warm up gradually." He and Eli stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed to give her privacy. Through the crack, they heard the soft splash as she climbed into the tub, then a small gasp that might have been pain or relief or both. Eli looked up at his father with questions written all over his face. "Dad, what happened to them?" "I don't know yet, buddy." "Are we taking them to the hospital?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I'm thinking about it." "You're thinking about it?" Eli's voice rose. "Dad, they're hurt. They're starving. They need doctors." "I know that, but it's not that simple. If we take them to the hospital, the system takes over. Social services gets involved. And that girl, Katie, she's terrified of being sent back to her aunt. She said people always send them back, which means someone knew this was happening and didn't stop it. So maybe the system isn't the answer here. Then what is? That was the question, wasn't it? Daniel had no idea what he was doing. He was a 42-year-old man who could barely take care of himself and his own son, drowning in debt and grief, living in a house that was falling apart around them. He had no business taking in 2 abused, half-starved children. He had no resources, no training, no right to play hero. But he also couldn't forget the way Katie had looked at him in the car, that mix of desperate hope and learned helplessness. Please don't take us back. How many times had she said those words to adults who ignored her? How many people had failed these girls? I don't know yet, Daniel admitted, but we're going to figure it out. A crash from the living room sent them both running. Nora had fallen off the couch, her body convulsing on the floor, eyes rolled back in her head. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, trying to remember first aid training from 20 years ago. Don't restrain her. Turn her on her side. Make sure she's breathing. Call 911, he shouted to Eli. No. Katie stood in the bathroom doorway, dripping wet, still in her dress because she'd been too modest or too scared to take it off, even for the bath. No, please. They'll take us away. They'll give us back to her. Katie, your sister is having a seizure. It's happened before. It stops on its own. Please, please don't call them. Daniel looked at Eli, phone already in his hand, then back at Nora's convulsing form, then at Katie's terrified face. Every instinct screamed to call for help. But Katie was right. The moment paramedics showed up, the girls would be taken away. The state would get involved. And if Katie was telling the truth, if the system had already failed them once— Put the phone down, Daniel heard himself say. Dad, put it down. The seizure lasted 45 seconds that felt like 45 years. When it finally stopped, Nora went limp, her breathing shallow but steady. Daniel carefully lifted her back onto the couch, checking her pulse, her pupils, looking for signs of another seizure coming. Katie climbed onto the couch beside her sister, curling around her, and Daniel didn't have the heart to tell her to get back in the bath. Has she had seizures before? He asked quietly. Katie nodded against her sister's shoulder. When she doesn't eat for too long, or when it's really cold. Aunt Nina said it's because she's weak and stupid, but I don't think that's true. I think it's because Aunt Nina doesn't feed us enough. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather, made Daniel's heart crack. These girls had been living in hell, and they'd learned to accept it as normal. How do you come back from that? How do you teach someone that they deserve basic human kindness when they've been shown nothing but cruelty? Okay, Daniel said, forcing his voice to stay calm. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Eli, go to the kitchen and make some warm broth. Just chicken bouillon and water, nothing heavy. Katie, you and Nora are going to stay on this couch, under these blankets, and you're going to rest. I'm going to keep watch to make sure Nora doesn't have another seizure. And if she does, then we call 911 no matter what. Agreed? Katie hesitated, then nodded. The next 2 hours were among the longest of Daniel's life. He sat in the old recliner across from the couch, watching the girls sleep, watching for any sign of distress. Eli brought the broth, weak and salty and probably not nutritious enough, but it was something. They woke Katie first, got half a cup down her, then woke Nora. The moment Nora's eyes opened, she started crying. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that tracked down her hollow cheeks, while her gaze darted around the unfamiliar room in pure panic. It's okay, Katie whispered, holding her sister's hand. This is Daniel and Eli. They helped us. We're safe. Where's Aunt Nina? Nora's voice was hoarse, barely audible. Not here. She doesn't know where we are. She'll find us. She always finds us. Katie looked at Daniel, and he saw the question in her eyes. Is that true? Will she find us? Nobody's going to hurt you here, Daniel said. I promise. Over the next hour, as warmth and a little food worked their magic, the girls gradually stopped looking like they were about to shatter. Color crept back into their faces. Their shivering subsided. They stayed huddled together on the couch like two halves of the same person, which Daniel supposed they were in a way. Twins who'd survived hell by clinging to each other. It was Eli who finally broke the careful silence. Do you guys want to see something cool? The girls looked at each other, then nodded cautiously. Eli disappeared into his room and returned carrying something Daniel hadn't seen in 2 years, the box of Christmas decorations from the attic. His son set it on the floor and started pulling out strings of lights, ornaments wrapped in newspaper, the angel that used to sit on top of their tree. "Eli, what are you doing?" Daniel asked. "It's Christmas Eve," Eli said simply. "Mom would want us to have a tree." Daniel's throat went tight. They'd stored the artificial tree in the attic after Sarah died, along with all the decorations she'd collected over 14 years of marriage. He hadn't been able to look at any of it, couldn't bear the memories attached to every ornament. This one from their honeymoon, that one from Eli's first Christmas, these handmade ones Sarah had crafted during her last good month when she'd still thought she'd have another Christmas with them. "Buddy, I don't think—" "Please, Dad." Eli's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please, they need a Christmas. We all do." Katie and Nora watched this exchange with wide eyes, not understanding the weight of what Eli was asking but sensing its importance. Daniel looked at them. Two broken children who'd been given every reason to stop believing in kindness, in safety, in anything good. Then he looked at his son, who'd lost his mother but was still somehow trying to save the world, one small act at a time. "Okay," Daniel whispered. "Let's do it." They spent the rest of the night transforming the living room. Eli retrieved the tree from the attic, a 6-foot artificial pine that had seen better days. Daniel helped him set it up in the corner while Katie and Nora watched from the couch, too weak to help but fascinated by the process. The girls had never seen anyone put up a Christmas tree before. Aunt Nina, they explained in halting voices, didn't celebrate holidays. Holidays were for people who deserved happiness, she'd told them, and they deserved nothing. Eli wrapped lights around the branches with the concentration of a surgeon, making sure they were evenly spaced, just like Sarah had taught him. Daniel hung ornaments, each one a small knife to his heart. Here was the glass ball from their first apartment, when they'd been young and poor and deliriously happy. Here was the felt reindeer Eli had made in kindergarten, complete with googly eyes. Here was the silver star Sarah had found at a yard sale, tarnished but beautiful, which she'd declared the most perfect ornament she'd ever seen. Katie's voice was small in the quiet room. "Why are you doing this? We're nobody. We're just—" Her voice broke. "We're just the throwaway kids." Daniel set down the ornament in his hand and crossed to the couch. He knelt in front of both girls, making sure they could see his face, see that he meant what he was about to say. "You are not throwaway kids. You are not nobody. You are Katie and Nora, and you are important, and you deserve every good thing in the world. And I know you don't believe that yet, because the people who should have protected you taught you something different. But we're going to change that, starting tonight." "But we can't pay you," Nora whispered, speaking for the first time since her seizure. "We don't have anything." "I'm not asking for payment. That's not how family works." "We're not your family." Daniel glanced at Eli, who'd stopped stringing lights to listen. "Family isn't just about blood," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke it. "It's about who shows up when you need them. It's about who makes you feel safe. And maybe we've only known each other for a few hours, but you're here, and we're here, and we're going to take care of each other. That makes us family." Katie and Nora looked at each other, having one of those silent twin conversations. Then Katie asked, "Can we help with the tree?" "I thought you'd never ask," Eli said, grinning. What followed was messy and chaotic and completely imperfect. The girls could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time, so they hung ornaments while sitting on the floor, passing decorations up to Eli, who'd climbed the stepladder to place them high on the tree. They argued about where things should go, whether the angel should face the window or the room, whether silver or gold balls looked better in the front. Katie giggled when Nora put an ornament on upside down. Nora smiled, actually smiled, when Eli let her plug in the lights and the tree blazed to life. Daniel stood back and watched, and for the first time in 2 years, his house felt like a home. By midnight, the tree was complete. Glowing in the dark living room, gifts scattered beneath it, mostly things from Eli's room that he'd wrapped in newspaper and offered without being asked. The girls had fallen asleep on the couch again, this time with full stomachs, another cup of broth each, plus half an apple, and warm bodies. They slept with their hands clasped together, two halves of a broken whole starting to heal. Eli collapsed in the recliner, exhausted. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. I'm glad we stopped." "Me too." "What are we going to do now?" That was the million-dollar question. Daniel looked at the girls sleeping peacefully for perhaps the first time in years, and he thought about Katie's fear of being sent back, about the bruises and welts, about the way they'd said people always promised to help and never did. He thought about his empty bank account and the bills piling up, and the eviction notice that would probably arrive after New Year's. He thought about how he was barely keeping his and Eli's heads above water, how he had nothing to offer these girls except a leaky house and good intentions. Then he thought about how Katie had looked at the Christmas tree, like she was seeing magic for the first time. He thought about Nora's smile when the lights came on. He thought about his son, 12 years old and already understanding that being a good person sometimes meant doing hard things, even when you had nothing left to give. And Daniel made a decision that would change all their lives. "We're going to fight," he said quietly, "for them, for us. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure they're safe, even if that means taking on the whole world." Eli nodded, like this was the answer he'd expected, the answer he'd needed to hear. Mom would have done the same thing. Yeah, she would have. Outside, snow continued to fall on Christmas morning, covering the world in white. Inside, 4 people who'd been broken in different ways slept under one roof, held together by nothing but hope and the fragile promise of a better tomorrow. The battle had only just begun, but for tonight, for this one perfect moment, they had each other, a glowing tree, and the belief that sometimes, against all odds, broken things could be made whole again. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting pale gold across the living room where 4 people lay sleeping in positions that told the story of their exhausted night. Daniel woke first, his back screaming from spending the night in the recliner, but he didn't move. The girls were still asleep on the couch, Katie's arm draped protectively over Nora even in sleep, both of them breathing deeply under the pile of blankets. Eli had curled up on the floor near the Christmas tree, using a throw pillow, refusing to go to his own bed when the girls might wake up scared in a strange place. Daniel's phone buzzed on the side table. A text from his landlord. "Rent was due 3 days ago. Need payment by the 27th or I'm starting eviction proceedings. Merry Christmas." He stared at the message, then at the sleeping children, then back at the message. The rent was $1,500. He had $237 in his checking account. His next paycheck wouldn't come until January 3rd, and it would barely cover utilities and groceries. The math didn't work. The math hadn't worked for months, and he'd been juggling bills, paying the most urgent ones while others slipped further behind, a desperate game he was slowly losing. Now he had 2 more mouths to feed, 2 children who needed everything: clothes, food, medical care, safety. 2 children he'd promised would be okay. He was an idiot. A well-meaning idiot who'd just made an impossible situation even more impossible. But when Katie stirred and opened her eyes, and the first thing she did was look around in panic until she saw him sitting there, and then her whole body relaxed with relief, Daniel knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things mattered more than money. Some promises had to be kept, even when you had no idea how. "Morning," he said softly, so as not to wake the others. "You're still here," Katie whispered, like she couldn't quite believe it. "Where else would I be? This is my house. I thought maybe last night was a dream, or that you'd change your mind while we were sleeping and call someone to take us away." Daniel's heart twisted. "Not a dream, not changing my mind. You're safe here, Katie. I meant what I said." She nodded, but he could see she didn't quite believe him yet. Trust, he was learning, wasn't something you could promise into existence. It had to be earned through action, through showing up day after day, through proving that your words weren't empty. These girls had been lied to so many times that words meant nothing anymore. He'd have to show them, however long it took. Nora woke next, and this time when her eyes opened, there was less panic and more confusion. She looked at Katie, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "We're okay. Remember? Daniel and Eli helped us. We're safe." "I'm hungry," Nora said, and it was such a normal thing for a child to say that Daniel almost laughed with relief. "Let's see what we can do about that." In the kitchen, Daniel assessed their supplies with growing concern. A box of pasta, 3 cans of soup, the apples in the fruit bowl, some eggs that were probably still good. bread that was definitely stale, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 2 tablespoons left at the bottom. He'd been planning to go shopping after he got paid, stretching what they had until then. But that was feeding 2 people, not 4. And these girls needed to eat frequently, small amounts at first, but multiple times a day to get their strength back without overwhelming their starved systems. He made scrambled eggs with the last of the bread, toasted and buttered. It wasn't much, but it was warm and it was protein. The girls ate slowly, carefully, like they expected the food to be snatched away at any moment. Nora kept glancing at the door, her shoulders tight with tension. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked gently. "She always came in the morning," Nora whispered. "Aunt Nina, she'd come check if we were still in bed. And if we weren't exactly where we were supposed to be, or if we'd messed something up, she'd—" Her voice trailed off, but Daniel could fill in the blanks from the bruises he'd seen. "Your aunt isn't here. She doesn't know where you are. And even if she did, she'd have to go through me to get to you." "You don't know her," Katie said quietly. "She's really mean. She told us once that nobody would ever want us, that we were too much trouble, that even our own parents didn't want us because they died and left us behind. She said we should be grateful she took us in instead of letting the state put us in separate foster homes." The casual cruelty of it made Daniel's hands clench around his coffee mug. "Your aunt is wrong, about all of it. Your parents died. That wasn't their choice, and it wasn't your fault. And you are wanted. You're wanted right here." Eli stumbled into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction, and immediately went to the cabinet to pull out 2 packages of instant hot chocolate he'd been saving. He made them carefully, testing the temperature before sliding the mugs across the table to Katie and Nora. "Merry Christmas," he said, grinning. "I promised you hot chocolate last night, didn't I, Dad?" The girls stared at the mugs like they contained liquid gold. Katie picked hers up with both hands, inhaling the chocolate scent, and her eyes filled with tears. "Nobody's ever—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Thank you." They spent Christmas morning in a strange bubble of almost normalcy. Daniel found some of Eli's old clothes that might fit the girls, sweatpants and hoodies that would be too big, but at least warmer than their thin dresses. Katie and Nora took turns showering properly this time, and when they emerged with clean hair and wearing clothes that actually covered their bodies, they looked more like children and less like victims of war. But the bruises were still visible, the hollow spaces in their cheeks, the way they startled at sudden movements, the way they stood close to walls, always keeping exits in sight. Trauma couldn't be washed away with soap and water. Eli insisted they open the presents under the tree, his video games, some books, a soccer ball he never used anymore. The girls opened each gift with reverent care, like they were made of glass. Nora held a stuffed bear that Eli had won at a carnival years ago, clutching it to her chest. "I can really keep this?" she asked. "It's yours," Eli said. "That's what presents are. Nobody takes them back." Around noon, reality intruded in the form of Daniel's phone ringing. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him step into the kitchen and take the call. "Hello? Is this Daniel Hayes?" A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Jennifer Walters. I'm a social worker with Child Protective Services. I received a report this morning about 2 children possibly staying at your address without proper guardianship. Can you tell me if you're currently housing minors who aren't your legal dependents?" Daniel's blood turned to ice. The girls were in the living room just 15 feet away, laughing at something Eli said. How did CPS know they were here? He'd been so careful not to call anyone, not to create a paper trail that would... And then he understood. Someone had seen his car stopped on the road last night, or a neighbor had noticed unfamiliar children through the window. In a small town, nothing stayed secret for long. "Mr. Hayes," the social worker prompted, "I need you to answer the question." He thought about lying, about saying no, there were no children here, she had bad information, but that would only delay the inevitable. If CPS had his address, they'd show up eventually. Better to control the situation now than have them arrive with police backup. "Yes," he said quietly. "There are 2 girls here. I found them last night, on Christmas Eve, abandoned and freezing by the side of Route 47. They were in immediate danger, so I brought them to my home to get them warm and fed. I see. And you didn't think to call emergency services or CPS directly? The girls begged me not to. They said they'd been in the system before and it failed them. They said they'd be sent back to their abusive aunt. A pause. Mr. Hayes, I understand you thought you were helping, but what you've done is technically kidnapping. Those children have a legal guardian, and removing them without proper authorization, their legal guardian was starving them. Daniel's voice rose despite his effort to stay calm. They have bruises all over their bodies. They haven't eaten in 3 days. One of them had a seizure from malnutrition. Their aunt did this to them, and if you send them back, she'll do worse. That's for us to determine. I'm going to need you to bring those girls to our office today so we can assess the situation properly. It's Christmas. Mr. Hayes, it's Christmas Day, and these children have probably never had a decent Christmas in their lives. Give them this one day, please. I'll bring them in tomorrow, first thing in the morning. I give you my word. Another pause, longer this time. If you don't show up tomorrow, I will send the police to retrieve them, and you'll be arrested for child endangerment and kidnapping. Am I clear? Crystal clear. 9 a.m. Ask for me at the front desk. She rattled off an address, which Daniel scribbled on a napkin with shaking hands. And Mr. Hayes, if those girls have any injuries that weren't properly reported, you'll be held responsible as well. The line went dead. Daniel stood in his kitchen, staring at the napkin with the address, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Tomorrow morning. He had less than 24 hours before he'd have to hand Katie and Nora over to the same system they'd begged him to protect them from, unless he didn't. The thought materialized before he could stop it. He could run. Pack up the car tonight, take the girls and Eli, and just drive. Head south where it was warmer, find some small town where nobody knew them, start over with new names, and what? Live on the run forever? Teach the girls that the only way to survive was to hide? Raise his son as a fugitive? Even if he could stomach that morally, practically, it was impossible. He had no money for gas, nowhere to go, no way to support 4 people while looking over his shoulder for police. No, running wasn't the answer. He had to fight. Properly, legally, through the system, even if the system was broken. He had to prove that these girls were in danger, that their aunt was unfit, that they deserved better. And he had to do it in less than a day. When he returned to the living room, 3 faces turned toward him expectantly. Eli, who'd obviously heard at least part of the conversation, looked worried. Katie and Nora looked terrified because they'd heard it too, and they knew what CPS meant. "You're giving us back," Katie said flatly. Not a question, a statement of inevitability. "No, I'm going to fight to keep you, but I need your help to do it. I need you to tell me everything about your aunt, about what she's done to you. I need names, dates, places. I need evidence, because tomorrow morning we have to go talk to a social worker, and we have to convince her that you're not safe with your aunt." "Nobody ever believes us," Nora whispered. "Then we'll make them believe. Come on, sit down, start from the beginning." What followed was 3 hours of the most heartbreaking testimony Daniel had ever heard. The girls sat close together on the couch, holding hands, taking turns speaking when the memories became too painful for one to continue alone. They told him about their parents, kind, loving people who died in a car accident when the twins were 4 years old. They told him about going to live with their mother's sister, Nina, who'd seemed nice at first but changed once the social worker stopped making regular visits. The abuse had started small, criticism that became constant, punishments that became excessive. Meals that became smaller and less frequent, withheld entirely as discipline for infractions as minor as speaking too loudly or forgetting to make their bed perfectly. The girls had learned to be quiet, invisible, perfect. But perfect was never good enough for Nina. She said we were expensive, Katie explained. That we cost too much money, ate too much food, took up too much space. She'd lock us in the basement sometimes for days with just a bucket and 1 bottle of water. She said we needed to learn what it felt like to really suffer, so we'd be grateful for what she gave us. The basement. The thought of 2 small children locked in darkness for days made Daniel physically ill. How long did this go on? 4 years, Nora said quietly. We're 8 now. It started when we were 4. 4 years of systematic abuse. 4 years of torture disguised as guardianship. And nobody had noticed, or nobody had cared enough to intervene. The girls mentioned in passing that teachers had asked about bruises, that neighbors had called CPS twice, that social workers had visited. But Nina always had explanations. The girls were clumsy. They fought with each other. They had behavioral problems. And she'd coached the twins on what to say, threatening worse punishment if they told the truth. She said if we ever told anyone, she'd make sure we were separated, Katie said. She'd tell them we were dangerous, that we hurt each other, and they'd put us in different foster homes and we'd never see each other again. That was worse than anything else she could do to us. We couldn't lose each other. Daniel understood. These girls had lost their parents, their home, their childhood. Each other was all they had left. The threat of separation was the ultimate weapon, and Nina had wielded it expertly. What about your uncle? Daniel asked. You mentioned her husband, Mark. Where was he during all this? The girls exchanged glances. Uncle Mark knew, Katie said carefully. He didn't hurt us himself, but he knew what Aunt Nina was doing. Sometimes he'd sneak us food when she wasn't looking, or leave the basement door unlocked so we could get out. But he never stopped her. He never called anyone. I think he was scared of her too. A coward then. A man who watched children suffer and did nothing because it was easier than standing up to his wife. Daniel added Mark to his mental list of people who'd failed Katie and Nora. Why did you run away last night? Nora's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said we couldn't have Christmas. She said we didn't deserve it. But then she went out to a party with Uncle Mark, and we were so hungry, and we thought maybe if we could get to town, someone would help us. Someone would give us food or call the police or something. But it was so cold, and we got lost, and then we couldn't walk anymore. They'd walked almost 6 miles in the freezing cold, in summer dresses, looking for help. 6 miles before their bodies gave out on that roadside where Daniel and Eli had found them. If they'd been there another hour, they would have died of exposure. The thought sat like lead in Daniel's stomach. He pulled out his phone and started taking notes, documenting everything the girls told him. Times, places, specific incidents. The more detail he had, the stronger his case would be tomorrow. But even as he wrote, doubt gnawed at him. Would any of this be enough? Nina had fooled the system for 4 years. She knew how to present herself as a legitimate guardian. She'd have explanations for everything. And CPS would see a well-established home versus a single father who could barely support his own child, who technically kidnapped these girls, who had no legal standing whatsoever. The odds weren't good. Around 3 in the afternoon, Eli pulled Daniel aside while the girls were distracted by a movie he'd put on. Dad, I've been thinking. Yeah? We need proof, right? Evidence that shows what their aunt did? That's the idea. Well, they have bruises and scars and stuff. Shouldn't we, photograph them? So if the social worker doesn't believe them, we can show actual evidence? Daniel looked at his 12-year-old son and wondered when he'd gotten so smart. That's actually a really good idea, but we'd need their permission, and it might be uncomfortable for them. I'll ask Katie, Eli said. I think she trusts me. 10 minutes later, with Katie's careful consent and Nora's nervous agreement, Daniel found himself documenting 4 years of abuse through his phone's camera. He tried to be clinical about it, detached, just recording evidence. But every photo was a punch to the gut. Bruises in the shape of handprints on their upper arms, welts across their shoulders that could only have come from being hit with something. A belt, maybe, or a switch. Scars on their shins that Katie explained came from being forced to kneel on rice as punishment. The girls' protruding ribs, each one countable. Their concave stomachs. The way their spines created ridges under their skin. This was what 4 years of systematic starvation and abuse looked like. This was what happened when the system failed, when adults looked away, when nobody fought for children who couldn't fight for themselves. By the time he finished, Daniel had over 40 photographs and a rage burning in his chest that threatened to consume him. He wanted to find Nina and Mark and make them feel every ounce of pain they'd inflicted on these innocent children. He wanted justice, real justice, not the slap-on-the-wrist variety that people like Nina always seemed to receive. But rage wouldn't help Katie and Nora. Only strategy would. Only careful planning and solid evidence, and somehow convincing a social worker that these girls belonged with him, a stranger rather than their legal guardian. The rest of Christmas Day passed in strange limbo. They tried to keep things light for the girls' sake, watching movies and eating the soup Daniel had carefully rationed. Katie and Nora began to relax incrementally, their shoulders loosening, their voices growing less timid. They laughed at the funny parts of the movies. They asked questions about the house, about Eli's life, about normal things that normal children wondered about. But underneath the fragile normalcy, tension thrummed like a live wire. Tomorrow was coming. Tomorrow, everything would change again. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep in Eli's room, they'd refused to be separated, so Eli had given up his bed and taken the couch. Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to organize his thoughts. What were his options? What could he realistically do? Option 1. Convince CPS that he should be granted emergency custody. Problem. He had no legal standing, no relationship to the girls, no resources to care for them long term. CPS would laugh him out of the building. Option 2. Prove Nina was unfit and get the girls placed in foster care while a proper investigation happened. Problem. Foster care might separate them, and even if it didn't, there was no guarantee they'd end up somewhere better than Nina's house. The system was overwhelmed, understaffed, and foster homes ran the spectrum from wonderful to nightmarish. Option 3. Find another family member who could take the girls. Problem. If there had been anyone else, surely CPS would have placed them there originally instead of with Nina. Every option was bad. Every path led to pain and uncertainty, and the very real possibility that Katie and Nora would end up back exactly where they'd started. Unless. Daniel pulled out his laptop, an ancient thing that took 5 minutes to boot up, and started searching. He researched emergency custody laws, guardian ad litem appointments, kinship care regulations. He read horror stories about children lost in the system and success stories about families who'd fought bureaucracy and won. He compiled a list of pro bono lawyers who specialized in child welfare cases. He found statistics about recidivism in abuse cases, studies showing that children returned to abusive homes faced increased danger. By 2 a.m., his eyes burned and his head pounded, but he had the skeleton of a plan. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even good. But it was something, and something was better than nothing. He was about to close his laptop when he noticed an email notification. The sender, Mark Whitmore. The subject line, I know where they are. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Mark was Nina's husband, the girl's uncle. How did he have Daniel's email? How did he even know the girls were here? With shaking hands, Daniel opened the message. Mr. Hayes, my name is Mark Whitmore. I'm the husband of Nina Whitmore, the legal guardian of Katie and Nora. I know they're with you. My wife is furious and planning to call the police tomorrow to have you arrested for kidnapping. But before that happens, I need to talk to you. Alone. There are things you need to know about Nina, about what she's done, about why I've been too afraid to speak up until now. I can help you, but we need to meet tonight. I'll be at the Waffle House on Route 47 at 3 a.m. Come alone, please. This might be the only chance those girls have. Daniel read the email 3 times, looking for the trap. This could be a setup. Mark could be working with Nina, trying to lure him out so she could take the girls back while he was gone. Or Mark could be genuine, a coward finally finding his courage because his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent anymore. Either way, Daniel couldn't ignore it. If there was even a chance Mark had evidence, testimony, anything that could help prove Nina's abuse in court, he had to take it. He checked on the kids one more time, all 3 sleeping soundly, then grabbed his jacket and car keys. He left a note on the kitchen table in case Eli woke up. Had to run out, be back soon, keep doors locked, call if anything happens. Then he drove through the dark streets to a meeting that would either save everything or destroy it completely. The Waffle House was nearly empty at 3 a.m, just a tired waitress and a drunk guy nursing coffee in the corner booth. Mark Whitmore sat in the back, hunched over a cup of tea, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. He was mid-40s, soft around the middle, with thinning hair and the kind of face that was easy to forget. Not someone you'd peg as living with a monster, but then again, monsters rarely looked like monsters on the outside. Daniel slid into the booth across from him. You have 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of time. Mark's hand shook as he wrapped them around his cup. Nina doesn't know I'm here. If she finds out I talked to you, she'll... He stopped, swallowed hard. She'll make my life hell. More than she already does. Your life is hell? Those girls have been tortured for 4 years and you did nothing. I know. Mark's voice cracked. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I'm a coward. I've always been a coward. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after what she did on Christmas Eve. What did she do? Mark pulled out his phone and set it on the table between them. On the screen was a video paused at the beginning. I started recording her about 6 months ago. Not constantly, just when I thought she might do something. I've been building evidence, trying to work up the courage to turn her in, but I was too scared. Until last night. He pressed play. The video showed a basement, concrete walls, one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, a washer and dryer in the corner. 2 small figures sat on the cold floor, huddled together for warmth. Katie and Nora, looking even more skeletal than they did now. The timestamp showed December 23rd, 9:47 p.m. Nina's voice came from off-camera, sharp and cruel. You think you deserve to eat today? After you broke that plate this morning? It was an accident, Katie's voice, small and terrified. We're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix broken plates. Sorry doesn't pay for the food you waste. You know what? I'm done with you two. Done feeding you, done housing you, done pretending I care whether you live or die. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I'm going to a party, and when I come back, if you're still here, I'm calling social services and telling them you ran away. Let them deal with you. Please, Aunt Nina, get out. Get out of my house. Walk to town. Beg on the streets. Freeze to death for all I care. You have 10 minutes to leave before I call the police and report you as runaways. The video showed Nina's legs walking away, the basement door slamming shut. The girls sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Katie started crying, deep, gulping sobs of a child who'd finally been pushed past their breaking point. We have to go, Nora whispered in the video. She means it this time. It's so cold outside. We'll die. We'll die here too. Come on. The video ended. Daniel stared at the phone, rage and vindication warring in his chest. This was evidence. Solid, undeniable proof of Nina's abuse, of her intent to abandon the children, of the fact that Katie and Nora hadn't run away. They'd been driven out into a blizzard and left to die. I have more videos, Mark said quietly. Dozens of them. Her screaming at the girls, hitting them, locking them in the basement without food, saying things that... His voice broke. Things no child should ever hear. I've been documenting it for months, but I didn't know what to do with it. If I gave it to the police, Nina would know it was me. She'd find a way to destroy me. She's smart, Mr. Hayes. She knows how to manipulate people, how to play the victim. I've seen her cry on command to convince social workers that she's a loving guardian being slandered by troubled children. She's gotten away with this for 4 years because she knows exactly what to say. Why are you helping now? Mark finally met Daniel's eyes. Because when I came home on Christmas morning and found the girls gone, Nina laughed. She actually laughed and said, good riddance. She assumed they'd died in the cold, and she was happy about it. That's when I realized I'd been married to a psychopath. That's when I knew, if I didn't do something, those girls' blood would be on my hands forever. He slid his phone across the table. Take it. Take all of it. Show it to the social worker tomorrow. Get those girls away from Nina permanently. I'll testify in court if you need me to. I'll admit I stood by and did nothing. I'll take whatever punishment comes my way, but please don't let her get them back. Daniel picked up the phone, feeling its weight like a grenade. This was it. This was the evidence that could save Katie and Nora. This was the ammunition he needed to fight CPS, to prove Nina was unfit, to keep the girls safe. She's going to destroy you for this, Daniel said. I know, but maybe that's what I deserve. Mark stood up, dropping a 20 on the table to cover his tea. There's one more thing you should know. Nina's family has money, old money. Her father is Lawrence Blackwell, the Blackwell who owns half the commercial real estate in this county. When this goes to court, she'll have expensive lawyers, connections, people who can make your life difficult. You're going to be fighting someone with a lot more power than you have. I don't care. I figured you'd say that. Mark almost smiled. The girls are lucky you found them. I hope that counts for something when this is all over. Then he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Daniel alone with a phone full of evidence and the growing realization that this fight was going to be even harder than he'd imagined. But as he drove home, watching the sky lighten from black to gray, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. The kind that came from having a chance, however small, to make something right in a world full of wrongs. He'd saved Katie and Nora from freezing to death. Now he had the tools to save them from ever being hurt again. Whatever came next, legal battles, financial ruin, facing down a family with power and money and connections, he'd handle it, because some promises had to be kept, some children had to be protected, some fights had to be fought, even when you were outmatched and outgunned and running on nothing but desperation and love. Dawn was breaking when Daniel pulled into his driveway. Inside the house, 3 children slept peacefully, trusting him to keep them safe. He wouldn't let them down, not now, not ever. The war had begun, and Daniel Hayes intended to win. Daniel had barely slept 2 hours when Eli shook him awake, panic written across his face. The morning sun streamed through the living room window where Daniel had collapsed on the couch after returning from his meeting with Mark, still clutching the phone that held their salvation. "Dad, wake up. Katie's having a nightmare and I can't calm her down. And Nora's crying too, and I don't know what to do." Daniel was on his feet instantly, his body moving before his mind fully caught up. In Eli's bedroom, he found both girls tangled in blankets, Katie thrashing and whimpering while Nora tried desperately to wake her sister, tears streaming down her own face. "Katie, hey, it's okay," Daniel said softly, kneeling beside the bed. He didn't touch her. Trauma victims often responded badly to being grabbed during nightmares, but kept his voice low and steady. "You're safe. You're at my house. Nobody's going to hurt you." Katie's eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, she didn't seem to see him at all, still trapped somewhere between sleep and memory. Then recognition dawned, and she launched herself at Daniel, wrapping skeletal arms around his neck and sobbing into his shoulder. "She was there," Katie gasped between sobs. "Aunt Nina was here, and she was dragging us back to the basement, and you couldn't stop her, and—" "Just a dream," Daniel murmured, finally allowing himself to hold her, one hand rubbing small circles on her back the way he used to comfort Eli after Sarah died. "Just a bad dream. Your aunt doesn't know where you are. She can't get to you." But even as he said it, doubt flickered. Nina would know by now that the girls were missing. Mark said she planned to call the police today. Even with the evidence Mark had provided, there would be a window of time where Nina could claim her rights as legal guardian, where the system might side with her simply because the law was on her side. The CPS appointment was in 3 hours. 3 hours to get the girls ready, to prepare them for what was coming, to somehow convince a social worker that everything he'd done was right. Nora crawled over and pressed against Daniel's other side, and he wrapped his free arm around her, holding both girls while they cried out 4 years of fear and pain and accumulated trauma that couldn't be healed in a single night, no matter how many Christmas trees he put up or promises he made. Eli stood in the doorway looking helpless and young, and Daniel realized his son was scared too. Scared they'd lose the girls. Scared his father would get in trouble. Scared that doing the right thing would somehow lead to everything falling apart. "Come here, buddy," Daniel said, and Eli didn't hesitate, joining the pile on the floor, 4 people holding each other like they could create safety through proximity alone. They stayed like that until the girls' breathing steadied and the tears dried on their cheeks. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel checked his watch, 7:45. They needed to leave in an hour to make the 9 o'clock appointment. First, though, the girls needed to eat, needed to look as healthy and cared for as possible, needed to understand what was about to happen. In the kitchen, Daniel scrambled the last of the eggs and toasted the final slices of bread. It wasn't much. His cupboards were now completely bare, but it was something. While the girls ate slowly, carefully, he sat across from them and laid out the situation as gently as he could. "Remember I told you we have to go talk to a social worker today? Her name is Jennifer Walters, and her job is to make sure children are safe and taken care of. She's going to ask you questions about your aunt, about what happened to you, about why you ran away. I need you to tell her the truth. All of it. I know it's scary. I know you've told people before and they didn't believe you, but this time is different." "How?" Katie asked, her voice small. How is it different? Daniel pulled out Mark's phone. Because this time, we have proof. Your Uncle Mark came to see me last night. He gave me videos he's been recording of your aunt, evidence of everything she's done to you. The social worker won't be able to ignore this. The girls stared at the phone like it might bite them. Uncle Mark helped us? Nora whispered, disbelief coloring every word. But he never helps. He just watches. I know, and he knows that was wrong, but he's helping now, when it matters most. He wants to make sure you never have to go back to that house. Katie's face crumpled. What if it's not enough? What if they still make us go back? Dad, I can't. She stopped, her eyes going wide as she realized what she'd called him. I mean, Daniel, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. It's okay, Daniel said, his throat tight. You can call me whatever feels right. Eli grinned despite the tension. Does this mean I have sisters now? We're not really, Katie started, but Nora interrupted her. I'd like to have a brother, she said quietly. And a dad who doesn't let people hurt us. The simple statement landed like a bomb in the quiet kitchen. These girls who'd been taught they deserved nothing, who'd been told they were worthless and unwanted, were daring to hope for a family. And Daniel, who could barely keep his own life together, was somehow supposed to make that hope into reality. Let's take this one step at a time, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. First, we convince the social worker. Then, we figure out the rest. They arrived at the Department of Social Services building at 8:50, Daniel's ancient sedan rattling into a parking space near the entrance. The building was gray concrete and narrow windows, institutional and unwelcoming, the kind of place designed for processing people rather than helping them. Katie and Nora held hands in the back seat, both pale, both terrified. Eli had insisted on coming despite Daniel's suggestion he wait in the car, and Daniel was grateful. His son's presence seemed to calm the girls, gave them someone to focus on besides their fear. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of industrial cleaner couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of desperation that clung to places where people came when they'd run out of options. A bored receptionist sat behind bulletproof glass, barely looking up as they approached. Here to see Jennifer Walters, Daniel said. 9 o'clock appointment. Daniel Hayes. The receptionist checked her computer, then buzzed them through a security door. They waited in a small room with plastic chairs bolted to the floor and children's drawings taped to the walls, attempts to make the space less threatening that only highlighted how threatening it actually was. Katie and Nora sat pressed together, their eyes tracking every person who walked past the door. Jennifer Walters appeared at 9:03, a thin woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much human misery to be shocked by anything anymore. She wore the expression of someone perpetually exhausted by a job that demanded more than any person could give. Mr. Hayes, I'm Jennifer Walters, and these must be Katie and Nora. Her voice softened fractionally when she addressed the girls. Thank you for coming in today. I know this is scary, but I promise we're going to figure out what's best for you. She led them to a conference room barely large enough for the table it contained. Daniel, Eli, and the girls sat on one side while Jennifer took the other, spreading out a manila folder thick with papers. Before we begin, Mr. Hayes, I need to inform you that removing children from their legal guardian without authorization is a serious offense. You're currently under investigation for possible kidnapping charges. Do you understand that? I understand that I saved 2 children who were dying on the side of the road on Christmas Eve, Daniel said evenly. I understand that their legal guardian had thrown them out into a blizzard with no coats, no shoes, no food. I understand that if I hadn't stopped, they'd be dead right now. So yes, I understand you think I committed a crime, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Jennifer's expression didn't change. The law exists to protect children, Mr. Hayes. Even when it seems counterintuitive, there are procedures that must be followed, procedures you violated. The law was already failing these girls. It failed them for 4 years while their aunt starved and beat them. Where were you then? Where was CPS when Katie and Nora were locked in a basement for days without food, when they were being told they deserved to suffer? We don't have any record of calls regarding Nina Whitmore or these children. That's because she's good at hiding it. She coaches them on what to say, threatens them with separation if they tell the truth, puts on a performance for social workers. But she made a mistake this time. She threw the girls out, and her husband recorded it. Daniel placed Mark's phone on the table. Everything you need to see is on here. Videos spanning 6 months, documenting systematic abuse. Nina Whitmore is not fit to care for these children, and I have proof. Jennifer picked up the phone, her skepticism evident. I'll need to verify the authenticity of any evidence before— Just watch one, Daniel interrupted. Please, one video. Then decide if you still think I'm the criminal here. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Jennifer unlocked the phone and clicked on the first video. Daniel had already watched them all during his sleepless hours before dawn, had memorized every moment of cruelty captured in digital clarity. But watching Jennifer's face as she saw Nina berating the girls for breaking a plate, calling them parasites and worthless mouths to feed, watching her expression shift from professional detachment to genuine horror, that was new. The video showed Nina grabbing Katie by the hair, shaking her hard enough that her neck snapped back. You want to eat today? You'll eat what I give you, when I give it to you, and you'll be grateful. Or you can go hungry. Your choice, you little leech. Jennifer stopped the video. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the phone down. How many videos are there? 47, Daniel said. Some are 30 seconds long. Some are 10 minutes. All of them show the same pattern of abuse, neglect, and psychological torture. Mark Whitmore has agreed to testify. He'll confirm that these videos are real, that they were taken in Nina's house, that he witnessed years of abuse and stayed silent because he was afraid of his wife. Jennifer turned to Katie and Nora, and her professional mask had cracked just enough to show the human underneath. Girls, I need to ask you some questions. I know you've probably been asked these things before, and I know adults haven't always believed you, but I need you to try one more time. Can you do that? Katie glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragement. Okay, she whispered. What followed was an hour of gentle but thorough questioning. Jennifer asked about their daily life with Nina, about meals and punishments and injuries. She asked about school. The girls admitted they hadn't been enrolled in over a year, that Nina claimed she was homeschooling them, but never actually taught them anything. She asked about Mark, about whether he'd ever hurt them directly. She asked about the night they ran away, making them walk through every detail. The girls answered as honestly as they could, their voices getting stronger as they realized Jennifer was actually listening, actually taking notes, actually treating their words as credible instead of dismissing them as troubled children making up stories. When Nora described being locked in the basement with no light and minimal food for 3 days after accidentally spilling milk, Jennifer had to pause and compose herself before continuing. Finally, she turned back to Daniel. You said you took photographs of their injuries? Daniel pulled out his phone and handed it over. Jennifer scrolled through the images, her jaw tightening with each new photograph. The bruises, the welts, the visible ribs, the hollows in their cheeks. Evidence that couldn't be explained away by clumsy children or sibling fights. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be frank with you. What you did, taking these children without authorization, was illegal. Under normal circumstances, I'd have to involve law enforcement. However, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. These are not normal circumstances. Based on what I've seen today, I believe these children were in immediate danger. I believe you acted to save their lives. And I believe that returning them to Nina Whitmore would put them at severe risk of further harm or death. Daniel felt something in his chest unclench, just slightly. So what happens now? Now I file for emergency removal and protective custody. The videos and photographs you've provided constitute sufficient evidence to remove the children from their current guardian, pending a full investigation. Nina Whitmore will be notified that her guardianship is under review. She'll have the right to contest this in court, and given what you've told me about her family's resources, she almost certainly will contest it. Where will the girls go? Jennifer's expression turned apologetic. Standard protocol is placement in licensed foster care while we investigate and arrange a hearing. I have several facilities that— No. The word came from Katie, sharp and loud. No, we're not going to foster care. We're staying with Daniel and Eli. That's our home now. Sweetie, I understand you feel safe with Mr. Hayes, but he's not a licensed foster parent. He hasn't been through the background checks or training required to— I don't care about checks or training, Nora said, her voice shaking but determined. He saved us. He kept us warm and fed us and gave us Christmas. He promised we were safe. We're not leaving him. Both girls had tears streaming down their faces, and Eli looked like he might start crying too. Daniel felt the weight of their trust like a physical thing, crushing and uplifting at the same time. "Ms. Walters," Daniel said carefully, "what would it take for me to become a licensed emergency foster placement? What hoops do I need to jump through?" Jennifer sighed. "It's not a quick process. Background check, home inspection, references, financial verification, hours of training. Under normal circumstances, it takes weeks or months. We don't have that kind of time. But there are exceptions, right? Emergency placements when a child's welfare is at stake? Technically, yes, but those require supervisor approval, and my supervisor is notoriously difficult to convince. She's very by the book." "Then let's go talk to her, right now, because I'm not letting these girls go into the foster system where they might be separated or placed with people who don't understand what they've been through. They've been shuffled around enough. They need stability. They need people who actually care about them. And whether you believe it or not, whether the law recognizes it or not, they need us and we need them." Jennifer studied him for a long moment. Then she stood abruptly. "Wait here. All of you. Don't leave this room." She disappeared into the hallway, taking Mark's phone and Daniel's phone with her. The five of them sat in heavy silence. The only sound Katie's quiet sniffling and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "Dad?" Eli said softly. "What if she says no? Then we figure out plan B." "What's plan B?" Daniel didn't have an answer to that because there was no plan B. This was it. This was their only shot at keeping the girls safe without running or hiding or breaking more laws than he already had. If Jennifer's supervisor said no, if they forced Katie and Nora into foster placement, he'd lose them. The system would swallow them up and he'd be nothing but a footnote in their file. The man who'd briefly given them hope before reality crushed it again. 20 minutes passed. 30. 45. Daniel was starting to think Jennifer had called the police, that any moment officers would arrive to arrest him and take the girls away, when the door finally opened. Jennifer entered, followed by a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a face that suggested she'd forgotten how to smile sometime during the Reagan administration. Her ID badge read, "Margaret Thornton, Supervisor." "Mr. Hayes," Margaret said, her voice clipped and professional, "I've reviewed the evidence Ms. Walters showed me. I've also run a preliminary background check on you. No criminal record, steady employment as a warehouse supervisor, widowed 2 years ago, sole custody of your son. References from your employer describe you as reliable and hardworking." Daniel held his breath. "However," Margaret continued, "you have significant financial difficulties. You're behind on rent, you have outstanding medical bills, and your income is barely sufficient to support yourself and one child, let alone 3 additional dependents. The state cannot place foster children in a home that doesn't meet basic financial stability requirements." Katie made a small, wounded sound. Nora's hand found Daniel's under the table, squeezing tight. "That said," Margaret's expression softened almost imperceptibly, "Ms. Walters has made a compelling argument that these particular children have extraordinary needs that outweigh standard protocol. They've experienced severe trauma and have formed an attachment to you and your son. Disrupting that attachment by placing them with strangers could cause additional psychological harm. Additionally, given the severity of abuse documented in these videos, I'm concerned that standard foster placement might not provide adequate protection if Nina Whitmore attempts to regain custody." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "I'm prepared to grant you emergency foster placement status for a period of 30 days. During that time, you'll need to complete accelerated training, pass a full home inspection, and demonstrate that you can provide adequate care. You'll also need to appear at a custody hearing where a judge will determine permanent placement. If you fail to meet any of these requirements, the children will be removed and placed elsewhere. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," Daniel said, afraid to believe what he was hearing. "One more thing. Nina Whitmore will be notified today that her guardianship has been suspended and that the children are in state custody pending investigation. She will likely hire lawyers. She will likely make your life difficult. The hearing will not be pleasant, and there's no guarantee you'll win. Foster placement is meant to be temporary, Mr. Hayes. Very rarely does it lead to permanent custody, especially for someone with no prior relationship to the children. I understand. Margaret pulled out a stack of forms. Sign these. They acknowledge that you understand the terms of emergency placement, that you agree to follow all state guidelines regarding foster care, that you consent to home inspections and regular check-ins from a caseworker. You'll also need to take the children to a licensed pediatrician within 48 hours for a complete medical examination and documentation of injuries. Daniel signed every form she put in front of him without reading them, not caring what he was agreeing to as long as it meant keeping Katie and Nora safe. Beside him, the girls watched with wide eyes, not quite daring to hope, but hoping anyway. When the last form was signed, Margaret gathered them up and stood. Miss Walters will be your caseworker. She'll contact you tomorrow to schedule the home inspection and provide information about training sessions. Do not miss any appointments. Do not give me any reason to regret this decision. You won't, Daniel promised. After Margaret left, Jennifer remained behind. She looked exhausted, like the meeting with her supervisor had aged her 5 years. You understand what you've taken on, right? These girls are going to need therapy, medical care, educational support, and constant attention. The trauma they've experienced doesn't just go away because they're in a safe home now. There will be nightmares, behavioral issues, trust problems. It's going to be hard. Harder than you probably imagine. I know. Do you? Because a lot of people think they're prepared for foster care, and then reality hits, and they realize they can't handle it. And when they give up, it's the children who suffer. They've been abandoned enough, Mr. Hayes. If you're not absolutely certain you can do this, tell me now. Don't wait until they're even more attached to you. Daniel looked at Katie and Nora, at their matching faces marked by fear and hope in equal measure. He looked at Eli, who'd already claimed them as sisters in his heart. He thought about Sarah, who would have taken these girls in without a second thought, who'd always believed their family had room for anyone who needed love. I'm certain, he said. We're in this. All the way. Jennifer's stern expression cracked into something that might have been a smile. Then good luck. You're going to need it. The drive home felt surreal. Daniel kept expecting someone to stop them, to realize they'd made a mistake, to take the girls away after all. But they made it back to the house without incident, and the moment they walked through the door, the reality of what had just happened seemed to hit everyone at once. Katie burst into tears, not sad crying, but the kind of overwhelming emotional release that came after holding everything in for too long. Nora joined her, and then Eli was crying too, and Daniel found his own eyes burning as he pulled all 3 kids into a hug in the middle of the living room. We can stay? Katie asked between sobs. Really stay? This is real? For 30 days, officially. But we're going to fight to make it permanent. I promise you, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never have to go back to that house or any place like it. What about Aunt Nina? Nora's voice was muffled against Daniel's shirt. She'll be so angry. She'll come after us. She can't touch you. The state has suspended her guardianship. If she tries to contact you or come near you, she'll be arrested. And when we go to court, we'll show the judge those videos and those photographs, and we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what she did. The word court hung in the air, a reminder that this was far from over. But for now, for today, they had this. They had each other. They had a home that was legally recognized, even if temporarily. They had hope that was built on something more solid than desperation. The rest of the day passed in a strange bubble of calm after crisis. Daniel made phone calls to his employer to request time off for the upcoming medical appointment and court dates, to a pro bono legal clinic Jennifer had recommended, to the school district to start the process of enrolling Katie and Nora. Eli dug through closets to find more clothes the girls could wear until Daniel could afford to buy them proper wardrobes. The girls themselves seemed to move through the house in a daze, touching things like they couldn't quite believe they were allowed to, asking permission for everything from sitting on the couch to getting water from the kitchen. You don't have to ask, Daniel told them gently. This is your home now. You can sit anywhere, eat when you're hungry, watch TV, play with Eli's toys. The only rules are basic safety stuff. Don't play with the stove. Don't go outside alone until we're sure Nina doesn't know where we are. Tell us if you're feeling sick or scared. That's it. Everything else, you just live like normal kids. We don't know how to do that, Katie admitted. We don't know what normal is. Then we'll figure it out together. That evening, Daniel finally allowed himself to check his email and found a message from the pro bono legal clinic. An attorney named Marcus Chen had reviewed the basic details Jennifer had sent over and agreed to represent Daniel in the custody hearing. The email was professional, but cautiously optimistic. Your case has unusual circumstances that work in your favor, but you need to understand that fighting for custody against a biological family member, especially one with resources, is an uphill battle. We'll do everything we can, but I want you to have realistic expectations. Realistic expectations meant preparing for the possibility that he'd lose, that a judge would decide blood mattered more than safety, or that Nina's expensive lawyers would somehow twist the narrative, or that the system would default to reunification because that's what the system always did. Daniel couldn't accept that. He wouldn't accept that. He'd made promises to two little girls who'd been lied to by every adult they'd ever trusted, and he intended to keep those promises even if it meant bankrupting himself, losing his house, fighting battles. He had no business fighting. His phone rang. Unknown number. Daniel almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Hayes?" A man's voice, smooth and cultured. "My name is Lawrence Blackwell. I believe you're currently housing my granddaughters." Daniel's blood ran cold. Lawrence Blackwell, Nina's father, the one Mark had warned him about, the man with money and power and connections. "Katie and Nora are in state custody," Daniel said carefully. "I'm their emergency foster placement." "Yes, I'm aware. I'm also aware that you've made serious allegations against my daughter. Allegations that, frankly, I find difficult to believe. Nina has always been a devoted aunt to those girls. If there were any problems in that household, I would have known about it." "Would you? Because your daughter spent 4 years torturing two children, and either you didn't know or you didn't care. Either way, your granddaughters nearly died because of her." A long pause. "I'm calling to offer you a deal, Mr. Hayes. Drop the custody petition. Return the girls to Nina's care. In exchange, I'll ensure you're compensated for your trouble. Shall we say $50,000? That should more than cover any expenses you've incurred." Daniel laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You think you can buy them? You think I'd sell two abused children back to their abuser for $50,000? I think you're a man drowning in debt who's taken on a responsibility he can't afford. I think you're well-meaning but naive, and I think you have no idea what you're up against. My daughter will fight this with every resource at her disposal. She'll have the best lawyers money can buy. She'll have character witnesses and expert testimony and every advantage. What will you have? A public defender and good intentions? That won't be enough. I have the truth. I have evidence. I have two little girls who deserve better than what your daughter gave them. The truth is subjective, Mr. Hayes. Evidence can be disputed. Children can be confused or coached. But family is permanent. Blood is permanent. And at the end of the day, judges tend to side with biological family. You're nothing to those girls, a stranger who played hero for a weekend. When this goes to court, you'll lose, and Katie and Nora will go home where they belong. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, Lawrence said, and though his tone remained pleasant, the threat was unmistakable. Think about my offer, $50,000, a fresh start for you and your son. Or you can fight and lose and walk away with nothing but legal bills and regret. Your choice. The line went dead. Daniel sat in his kitchen, shaking with rage and fear and determination. They were coming after him now. The full weight of the Blackwell family money and influence turning toward him like a weapon. They'd try to intimidate him, discredit him, destroy him. They'd make him wish he'd never stopped on that road on Christmas Eve. But he had stopped. He had found those girls. And he'd be damned if he'd abandoned them now, just because powerful people wanted him to. In the living room, he could hear Eli teaching Katie and Nora how to play a board game, their laughter floating through the house like music. Normal sounds, happy sounds, the sounds of children who'd been given a chance to be children again. That's what he was fighting for. Not custody papers or legal victories, but those sounds, that laughter, that chance. The battle ahead would be brutal. Daniel knew that now. Nina would have her father's money behind her, lawyers who could twist facts and manufacture doubt, connections that could make his life hell. The odds were stacked impossibly against him. But he'd faced impossible odds before. He'd watched his wife die and somehow found the strength to keep going for Eli's sake. He'd worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills that would never be fully paid. He'd survived grief and poverty and the kind of loneliness that hollowed you out from the inside. He could survive this too. He had to. Because 3 kids were counting on him, and he'd promised them safety, and Daniel Hayes kept his promises, even when keeping them might cost him everything. The morning after Lawrence Blackwell's threatening phone call, Daniel woke to find Nora standing beside the couch where he'd fallen asleep again, her small hand gently shaking his shoulder. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, and for a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember what day it was or why his entire body ached like he'd been hit by a truck. Then memory crashed back. The custody battle. The threat. The impossible fight ahead. "Daniel?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay? You were making sad sounds in your sleep." He sat up, rubbing his face. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "What time is it?" 7:30. Katie's still sleeping, but I got hungry and I didn't know if I was allowed to get food by myself. The fact that she had to ask permission to eat in her own home, because this was her home now, temporary or not, made Daniel's chest tighten. "You're always allowed to get food. Always. If you're hungry, you eat. That's a rule here, okay? Nobody goes hungry in this house." Nora nodded, but her eyes were uncertain, like she was waiting for the catch. There was always a catch with adults. Daniel recognized that look because he'd seen it in Eli's eyes for months after Sarah died. That wariness that came from learning the world wasn't safe, that good things could be ripped away without warning. "Come on," he said, standing and stretching his protesting back. "Let's make breakfast together. You can help." In the kitchen, Daniel assessed their situation with growing concern. The eggs were gone. The bread was gone. The cupboards held exactly 3 cans of soup, a box of pasta, and some stale crackers. His bank account held $73 until his next paycheck in 5 days. He had 4 people to feed and barely enough food for one day, let alone 5. He'd have to get creative. And by creative, he meant swallowing his pride and doing something he'd sworn he'd never do. "Nora, can you wake up Katie and Eli? Tell them we're going on an adventure." 20 minutes later, all 4 of them were in the car heading toward St. Mary's Church on the east side of town. Daniel had driven past their food pantry 100 times over the past 2 years, had seen the signs advertising free groceries for families in need, and had always told himself he wasn't that desperate yet. He had a job. He could provide for his son. Accepting charity meant admitting failure, meant acknowledging that he couldn't handle things on his own. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about 3 kids who needed to eat, and Daniel's stubborn refusal to ask for help didn't matter in the face of their empty stomachs. The church parking lot was already half full when they arrived, despite the early hour. Other families stood in line outside the fellowship hall, some looking embarrassed, others resigned, a few openly grateful. Daniel recognized a couple of people from the neighborhood: the single mom from 3 streets over who worked 2 jobs, the elderly veteran who lived alone, the young couple with a newborn baby who'd moved in last month. Poverty had a way of being invisible until you were standing in it yourself. "Why are we here?" Katie asked nervously, pressing close to Daniel's side as they joined the line. "We need groceries, and this is where people go when money's tight. There's no shame in it. Sometimes people need help, and sometimes people are able to give help. That's how communities work." Eli looked uncomfortable. "Dad, I thought you said we were okay. You said—" "I said a lot of things that were more hopeful than honest, buddy. Truth is, we've been struggling since your mom died, and taking in Katie and Nora means we need more resources than I have right now. So we're going to accept some help until I can get back on my feet. Understand?" His son nodded slowly, and Daniel saw him processing this new information, that his father wasn't invincible, that they'd been closer to the edge than Eli had realized, that the illusion of stability Daniel had worked so hard to maintain was just that, an illusion. Inside the fellowship hall, volunteers with kind faces directed them through stations where they could select canned goods, produce, bread, and other staples. Everything was donated, some of it slightly past its prime, but still edible. Daniel filled 2 bags with whatever looked nutritious enough to help Katie and Nora regain their strength. Canned chicken, beans, rice, vegetables, fruit cups, peanut butter, oatmeal. One volunteer, an elderly woman with silver hair and warm eyes, pressed a $20 bill into his hand. "For the little ones," she whispered, "get them something special." Daniel tried to refuse, but she closed his fingers around the money. "I've been where you are, dear. I know what it's like to choose between pride and feeding your children. Choose the children. Always choose the children." He thanked her with a voice that cracked around the edges and herded his small family back to the car, where Katie and Nora were uncharacteristically quiet. "Are we poor?" Nora asked as Daniel loaded the bags into the trunk. He paused, considering how to answer. Sarah would have known what to say. She'd always been better with the emotional stuff, the hard conversations. But Sarah was gone, and Daniel had to fumble through on his own. "Right now, we don't have a lot of money," he said carefully. "But we have enough. We have food. We have a home. We have each other. Some people have less. Some people have more. The important thing is we take care of each other and we accept help when we need it, so we can survive to fight another day." Katie's eyes were wet. "Is it because of us? Are you poor because you took us in?" "No," Daniel said firmly. "I was barely making it before I found you. Taking you in didn't break anything that wasn't already cracked. And I'd rather be broke with all of you than comfortable and alone. Money comes and goes. Family stays." "But we're not really family," Nora whispered. "Not legally. Not for real. We're as real as it gets. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Choice does. Showing up for each other does. And we're doing all of that, so yeah, we're family. The state just needs to catch up and make it official." They spent the rest of the morning unpacking groceries and trying to make the house look presentable for the home inspection Jennifer Walters had scheduled for that afternoon. Daniel cleaned with a fury born of desperation, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean, organizing closets that were already organized. The house was small and shabby, and the roof leaked and the pipes groaned, but it was theirs, and he needed the inspector to see past the poverty to the love underneath. Eli helped without being asked, vacuuming and dusting and even cleaning his room without complaint. Katie and Nora followed them around, uncertain how to help but wanting to contribute. Daniel set them to work folding the clean laundry, a simple task that made them feel useful and gave his racing mind something to focus on besides the million ways this inspection could go wrong. Jennifer Walters arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick people pulled to fake a suitable home. She walked through each room methodically, checking smoke detectors and outlets, inspecting the refrigerator now stocked with food from the pantry, examining the sleeping arrangements Daniel had improvised. The girls would share Eli's room while Eli took the couch until Daniel could afford bunk beds. "The house needs repairs," Jennifer noted, making marks on her forms. "That water stain on the ceiling suggests a roof leak. The heating system is inadequate. Several windows don't close properly." "I know," Daniel said. "I'm working on it. I've been trying to save up for repairs, but I'm not criticizing, Mr. Hayes. I'm documenting. The house is clean, safe, and clearly loved. The children seem comfortable here. Those things matter more than perfect infrastructure." She paused in the living room, looking at the Christmas tree still standing in the corner, lights twinkling even in the afternoon sun. "You kept it up." The girls had never had a real Christmas before. Seemed wrong to take it down. Jennifer's stern expression softened fractionally. She knelt down to where Katie and Nora sat on the couch, putting herself at their eye level. "How are you girls doing? Are you eating enough? Sleeping okay?" Katie nodded. "Daniel takes really good care of us, and Eli shares his room and his toys and everything. We've never had a brother before. It's nice." "Have you been having nightmares?" Both girls exchanged glances. "Sometimes," Nora admitted, "but Daniel comes when we call him, and he stays until we fall back asleep. He doesn't get mad that we wake him up." "That's good. That's what parents are supposed to do." Jennifer stood, making more notes. "I'm going to recommend continued placement. However, you all need to understand that the custody hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. That's when a judge will decide permanent placement. Until then, Mr. Hayes, you're under a microscope. Any problems, any concerns, anything that suggests these children aren't being properly cared for, and they'll be removed immediately. There won't be any problems. I hope you're right, because Nina Whitmore has already hired representation, a lawyer from Blackwell and Associates, her father's firm. They're filing a motion to contest the emergency placement and regain custody. The hearing will determine who wins. Daniel felt ice settle in his stomach. When's the hearing? January 23rd, 9 a.m., County Courthouse. Your attorney will receive official notice, but I wanted to tell you in person, you need to be prepared for what's coming, Mr. Hayes. The Blackwells are connected. They have resources and influence. They're going to come after you hard. Let them come. Jennifer studied him for a long moment. You really mean that, don't you? You're actually willing to fight this battle. These kids are worth fighting for. I hope the judge agrees with you. After Jennifer left, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his phone and called Marcus Chen, the pro bono attorney who'd agreed to represent him. They spent an hour going over strategy, evidence, potential arguments. Marcus was cautiously optimistic about the videos Mark had provided, but warned that Nina's lawyers would try to discredit them somehow, claim they were taken out of context or edited, or that Mark was lying to cover his own negligence. We need Mark to testify in person, Marcus said. Is he willing to do that? He said he was when he gave me the videos, but I haven't heard from him since that night. I don't know if he's changed his mind or if Nina's gotten to him. We need to find out. A husband's testimony against his own wife carries significant weight, especially when corroborated by video evidence. Without him, this case gets a lot harder. After they hung up, Daniel tried calling the number Mark had used to contact him originally. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He left a message asking Mark to call back urgently, then tried again an hour later with the same result. By evening, worry had transformed into full-blown concern. Had Mark changed his mind? Had Nina discovered what he'd done? Had Lawrence Blackwell gotten to him with threats or bribes, or both? The not knowing was worse than bad news would have been. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep despite his exhaustion. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him, his mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if Mark refused to testify? What if the judge decided blood ties mattered more than safety? What if the Blackwells' expensive lawyers found some technicality or loophole that invalidated the emergency placement? What if he lost and had to watch Katie and Nora be dragged back to the woman who'd tortured them? Around 2 a.m., he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Katie appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed bear Eli had given her, her face pale in the darkness. Can't sleep? Daniel asked softly. She shook her head and padded over to the couch. Daniel made room and she curled up beside him like a much younger child, seeking comfort from nightmares both past and future. I heard you on the phone earlier, Katie whispered, talking about the hearing, about Aunt Nina fighting to get us back. You weren't supposed to hear that. I know, but I did. And now I can't stop thinking about what happens if the judge says we have to go back to her. What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're lying? Daniel wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders. Then we'll appeal. We'll fight harder. We'll do whatever it takes. But what if whatever it takes isn't enough? What if... Her voice broke. What if we end up back in that basement? What if this was just a dream and we wake up and none of it was real? Katie, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. This is real. This family is real. Your safety is real. And I swear to you, I will not let Nina hurt you again. Even if I have to stand between you and every judge and lawyer in the state, even if I have to fight with nothing but my bare hands, I will protect you. Do you believe me? She studied his face in the dim light filtering through the windows, searching for lies or false promises or the kind of adult manipulation she'd learned to recognize. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly and rested her head against his shoulder. I want to believe you, she whispered. I'm trying really hard to believe you. That's all I can ask. They sat in silence for a while, Katie's breathing gradually evening out as exhaustion won over anxiety. Just as Daniel thought she'd fallen asleep, she spoke again, her voice drowsy. My mom used to say that the universe sends you what you need when you need it most. She said that when she and Dad were really struggling, before Nora and I were born, someone helped them out of nowhere. Just showed up and changed everything. She said someday we'd be able to do that for someone else. Katie's eyes drifted closed. I think you're what the universe sent us. Our miracle. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart after Sarah died. You're our miracle too, sweetheart. You and Nora. You brought this family back to life." Katie was asleep before he finished speaking, her small body finally relaxing into the safety she was still learning to trust. Daniel sat there holding her, staring at the Christmas tree lights blinking in the darkness, and made a silent promise to Sarah's memory, to the woman who'd taught him what it meant to be a parent, who'd shown him that family was built through love and choice and showing up every single day. He promised he'd protect these girls the way she would have wanted. He promised he'd fight for them until he had nothing left to give. He promised he wouldn't fail them, even if keeping those promises destroyed him in the process. The next morning brought the pediatrician appointment Jennifer had mandated. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo was a woman in her 40s with gentle hands and kind eyes who specialized in working with traumatized children. She examined Katie and Nora with patience and care, documenting every injury, every sign of malnutrition, every indicator of long-term abuse. The girls cried during parts of the examination, not from pain but from the overwhelming vulnerability of being exposed, of having their suffering made visible and real. "These children have been systematically starved," Dr. Okonkwo told Daniel afterward, her professional composure barely masking her anger. "Their growth has been stunted. They have nutritional deficiencies that will require supplements and careful dietary management. The scarring on their bodies is consistent with repeated physical abuse over an extended period. This didn't happen overnight, Mr. Hayes. This was years of deliberate cruelty." "I know. That's why I'm fighting to keep them away from the person who did it." "Good." She handed him a thick folder. "This is my full medical report, including photographs and detailed documentation of every injury. Give this to your lawyer. Any judge who reads this and still sends these children back to their abuser should be removed from the bench." But Daniel knew that justice didn't always work the way it should. He knew that courtrooms weren't about right and wrong as much as they were about who presented the better argument, who had the better lawyers, who could manipulate the system more effectively. The Blackwells had every advantage. All Daniel had was the truth. Sometimes the truth wasn't enough. That evening, as Daniel was preparing dinner, spaghetti with sauce made from the canned tomatoes from the food pantry, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a young man in an expensive suit holding a manila envelope. "Daniel Hayes?" "Yes." "You've been served." The man thrust the envelope into Daniel's hands and walked away before Daniel could respond. Inside were legal documents. A motion filed by Nina Whitmore's attorneys demanding immediate return of the children, claiming wrongful removal and defamation of character. A counterclaim against Daniel for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and interference with legal guardianship. A detailed character assassination that painted Nina as a devoted aunt whose difficult charges had made false accusations as a cry for attention, and Daniel as an unstable widower who'd overstepped his authority in a misguided attempt to play hero. The paper cited Nina's clean record, her financial stability, her family connections. They included statements from neighbors who claimed the girls had always seemed well cared for, from a teacher who said Katie and Nora were simply high-spirited when they'd been enrolled in school 2 years ago. They even had a statement from a social worker who'd visited the home 3 years prior and found nothing concerning. It was a masterclass in manipulation, taking the same facts Daniel had and twisting them into a narrative where Nina was the victim and he was the villain. The Blackwell lawyers had worked fast and efficiently, building their case like a fortress while Daniel was still scrambling to understand the battlefield. Marcus called an hour later after receiving his copy of the motion. "This is aggressive, even for family court. They're trying to intimidate you, make you back down before the hearing. Don't let them. We have stronger evidence than they know." "What if it's not strong enough?" "Then we make it strong enough. I'm going to petition for Mark Whitmore to be subpoenaed. If he won't testify voluntarily, we'll compel him. And I'm requesting that the judge interview the girls privately, away from both parties. Children's testimony carries weight when it's clear they're not being coached. Nina will say, 'I've been coaching them.' And we'll prove you haven't. Daniel, I won't lie to you. This is going to be ugly. They're going to try to destroy your character, question your motives, make it seem like you're the danger here instead of Nina. But we have the videos, we have the medical report. We have 2 little girls whose bodies tell the story even if their words didn't. That truth is powerful. We just have to make sure the judge sees it." After Marcus hung up, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the legal papers spread out in front of him, each page a reminder of how outmatched he was. The Blackwells were playing chess while he was barely grasping checkers. They had lawyers and money and connections and the entire weight of their family influence behind them. What did he have? A public interest attorney who was overworked and underpaid, a house that was falling apart, a bank account that was always one emergency away from zero. But he also had something they didn't. He had 3 kids who loved him, who trusted him, who believed he'd keep them safe. He had the moral high ground, even if the legal ground was shaky. He had the kind of righteous anger that came from watching injustice play out and deciding to stand against it even when standing was dangerous. "Dad?" Eli stood in the kitchen doorway, his face worried. "Are those the papers from Nina's lawyers?" "Yeah." "Are they bad?" Daniel looked at his son, 12 years old and already too familiar with adult problems, already carrying burdens no child should have to carry. He could lie, could say everything was fine, could maintain the illusion of control. Or he could treat Eli like the almost man he was becoming, the partner in this fight who deserved honesty. "They're pretty bad," Daniel admitted. "Nina's fighting hard to get the girls back, and she's got powerful people helping her. It's going to be a tough battle." "But we're going to win, right?" "I don't know, buddy. I hope so. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we do. But I can't promise you we'll win. The system doesn't always work the way it should." Eli was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he straightened his shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of Sarah that Daniel's breath caught. "Then we just have to fight harder than they do. We have to make them see that Katie and Nora belong here, with us. And if the system doesn't work right, we'll make it work right." The simple conviction in his son's voice, the absolute certainty that right would triumph over wrong because it had to, reminded Daniel why he was fighting in the first place. Not for legal victories or custody papers, but for this. For children who still believed the world could be good, who still had faith that adults could protect them, who still dared to hope despite every reason not to. "You're right," Daniel said. "We fight harder. All of us together." That night, after the kids were asleep, Daniel finally received a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Hayes, it's Mark Whitmore." Relief flooded through him. "Mark, I've been trying to reach you. I need to know if you're still willing to testify. The hearing is in 3 weeks, and my lawyer needs—" "I can't do it." Mark's voice was barely above a whisper, thick with fear. "I'm sorry. I want to help those girls. I do. But Nina found out I talked to you. She knows I gave you the videos, and her father, Mr. Hayes, Lawrence Blackwell, is destroying me. He got me fired from my job. He's somehow frozen our bank accounts. He's threatened to have me arrested for theft of marital property. Those videos I took in my own house. He's claiming they're illegal recordings. His lawyers say if I testify against Nina, they'll bury me in lawsuits until I have nothing left." Daniel's heart sank. "Mark, those girls need you. Without your testimony, without you to verify those videos are real and unedited, Nina's lawyers will claim they're fake or taken out of context. You're the only one who can prove what she did." "I know, and I hate myself for being a coward, but I have a son, Mr. Hayes, a 12-year-old boy who's already watching his parents destroy each other. If I testify, if I go against Nina and her father, my son will be caught in the crossfire. Lawrence made it very clear what would happen. I'd lose custody, I'd never see my boy again, they'd make sure I was painted as an unstable father who abandoned his family. I can't risk my son. I just can't." "So you're going to let Katie and Nora go back to being tortured? You're going to condemn them to more years of hell because you're afraid? I gave you the videos. That should be enough." "It's not enough without you to authenticate them. Don't you understand? Without your testimony, those videos are just clips that could have been taken anywhere by anyone. Nina's lawyers will tear them apart, and the judge will have reasonable doubt, and those girls will be sent back to the woman who tried to kill them." Silence on the other end of the line. Daniel could hear Mark breathing, could practically feel his internal struggle through the phone. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know what this makes me. I know I'm failing them again, but I can't sacrifice my own child to save them. I won't." "Then you're condemning all 3 of them, Katie, Nora, and your son, because you know what Nina is. You know what she's capable of. If she wins custody, if she learns she can get away with this kind of abuse, how long before she turns that cruelty on your boy? How long before he's the one locked in the basement, starved and beaten? You think Lawrence Blackwell's protection will last forever? You think Nina's rage won't eventually find another target? Mark made a sound like a sob. Don't, please don't. You want to protect your son? Testify against Nina? Put her away where she can't hurt anyone else's children, including yours. Be the father your son needs you to be. Be the man who finally did the right thing, even when it was terrifying. I can't. I'm not strong enough. I'm not brave like you. I'm not brave, Daniel said quietly. I'm terrified every single day. Terrified I'll lose these girls. Terrified I'll fail them. Terrified that everything I'm doing won't be enough. But I show up anyway because they need me to. That's all bravery is, Mark. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Another long silence. Then, I need to think about it. I need time. We don't have time. The hearing is in 3 weeks. I know. I need to figure out how to do this without losing everything. If you figure it out, call me. Please, Mark. Those girls' lives are in your hands. Mark hung up without promising anything, and Daniel was left staring at his phone, feeling their strongest piece of evidence slip away like water through his fingers. Without Mark's testimony, the videos lost much of their power. Nina's lawyers would claim they were doctored or staged. The judge might not admit them as evidence at all without proper authentication. They were losing before the battle had even begun. Daniel walked to Eli's room where the girls were sleeping, their small forms curled together under blankets, Katie's arm thrown protectively over Nora, even in sleep. They looked peaceful. They looked safe. They looked like children who'd finally found the sanctuary they'd always deserved. He couldn't let them down. Wouldn't let them down. Even if Mark refused to testify, even if the videos were thrown out, even if every piece of evidence he had crumbled to dust, he'd find another way. He'd fight with whatever weapons remained. He'd stand in that courtroom and tell the truth with such conviction that the judge would have no choice but to believe him. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was watching Katie and Nora be dragged back to hell while he stood by powerless. The alternative was teaching them that adults couldn't be trusted after all, that promises were just pretty lies, that safety was always temporary and love was always conditional. Daniel refused to let that be their story. Their story was going to have a different ending. It had to. Even if that meant fighting battles he couldn't win, even if it meant facing down an empire built on money and influence and corrupt power, even if it meant risking everything he had left in this world. He'd do it. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed hopeless. Some children were worth saving, even when salvation seemed impossible. Some promises had to be kept, even when keeping them might break you completely. Daniel Hayes had made his choice. Now he just had to figure out how to make that choice matter when everything and everyone seemed determined to prove him wrong. The 3 weeks leading up to the custody hearing passed in a blur of sleepless nights and mounting dread. Daniel threw himself into preparation with the desperation of a drowning man, working with Marcus Chen every evening after the kids went to bed, rehearsing testimony, anticipating Nina's lawyers' arguments, building their case brick by fragile brick. But without Mark's testimony, those bricks felt like paper, ready to dissolve the moment Nina's high-powered attorneys applied pressure. Jennifer Walters visited twice more, checking on the girls' adjustment, documenting their progress. Katie had gained 3 pounds. Nora's nightmares were less frequent. Both girls smiled more readily, laughed more easily, were learning slowly to trust that meals would come regularly and adults wouldn't hurt them. Jennifer wrote all of this in her reports, but even she seemed pessimistic about their chances. The judge assigned to your case is Harold Morrison, she told Daniel during her final visit. He's old school, believes strongly in family reunification. He's going to need overwhelming evidence to rule against a biological family member, especially one with the Blackwell name. We have overwhelming evidence, Daniel insisted. The videos, the medical reports, the girl's testimony. Without authentication, those videos might not even be admissible. And children's testimony is notoriously unreliable in family court. Judges know kids can be coached or confused. They'll give more weight to Nina's lawyers when they paint you as an emotionally unstable widower who projected his savior complex onto vulnerable children. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. That's not what happened. I know that. You know that. But the courtroom isn't about truth, Mr. Hayes. It's about what you can prove beyond doubt. And right now there's plenty of room for doubt. The night before the hearing, Daniel couldn't eat. He moved through the evening routine mechanically: dinner, dishes, homework help for Eli, baths for the girls. Katie and Nora were quieter than usual, sensing the tension, understanding that tomorrow would determine their entire future. After they were in bed, after Eli had finally fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at his phone and willing Mark to call. The phone remained silent. At midnight, Daniel gave up on sleep entirely and reviewed their case materials one more time. The medical report from Dr. Okonkwo was damning: pages of documentation showing systematic abuse, malnutrition, evidence of long-term trauma. The photographs he'd taken were horrifying in their clarity. Even the timeline they'd constructed showed a pattern of escalating violence that should convince anyone with a conscience. But Nina's counter-arguments were equally thorough. Character witnesses claimed she was a devoted aunt. Financial records showed she'd spent money on the girls: clothes, school supplies, necessities. She had an explanation for every injury. The girls were clumsy, accident-prone, fought with each other. She painted herself as a struggling guardian, doing her best with difficult children who'd been traumatized by their parents' deaths and never properly bonded with her. It was all lies, but they were convincing lies backed by expensive lawyers and the Blackwell family's sterling reputation in the community. Daniel must have dozed off at the kitchen table because he woke to gentle hands shaking his shoulder. He looked up, disoriented, to find both Katie and Nora standing beside him in their pajamas, their faces grave in the pre-dawn darkness. "We couldn't sleep," Katie said. "We're scared about today." Daniel checked his watch. 4:30 in the morning. The hearing was in 4.5 hours. "Me too, sweetheart." "What if we lose?" Nora's voice was barely audible. "What if the judge makes us go back to Aunt Nina?" He wanted to promise them it wouldn't happen, wanted to give them absolute certainty, but he couldn't lie to them. They'd been lied to enough. "I don't know what will happen today. I wish I could promise you everything will be okay, but I can't. All I can promise is that I'll fight as hard as I possibly can. And no matter what happens in that courtroom, you need to know that you matter. You're important. You deserve to be safe and loved. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Katie climbed into his lap despite being too big for it, and Nora pressed against his side. They sat together in the quiet kitchen while darkness slowly gave way to gray dawn. 3 hearts beating in sync, holding on to each other because it was all they could do. "I don't want to go back there," Katie whispered. "I don't want to be hungry all the time and scared all the time and hurting all the time. I want to stay here. I want you to be our dad for real." "I want that too, more than anything." "Then make it happen," Nora said with the simple faith of a child who still believed adults could fix anything if they tried hard enough. "Tell the judge the truth and make him believe you. Make him see what she did to us." If only it were that simple. If only truth automatically triumphed over lies. If only justice was as straightforward as right versus wrong. But Daniel nodded and held them tighter, drawing strength from their trust, even as the weight of possibly failing them threatened to crush him completely. By 8 o'clock, they were all dressed in their best clothes, which for Daniel meant a suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, and for the girls meant dresses Jennifer had brought by from a donation center. Eli wore slacks and a button-down shirt that was already too small, evidence of how much he'd grown in the past year. They looked like a family heading to church instead of a courthouse, holding on to normalcy like a shield against what was coming. The county courthouse was an imposing building of gray stone and tall windows, with marble floors that echoed every footstep and made everyone speak in hushed tones. Marcus Chen met them in the lobby, carrying a briefcase that Daniel hoped contained enough ammunition to win this war. The lawyer's expression was professionally neutral, but Daniel could read the tension in his shoulders. "I got a call this morning," Marcus said quietly. "Mark Whitmore has decided to testify after all." Daniel's heart leaped. "He's coming?" "He'll be here. But there's something you should know. He's bringing his son with him. The boy insisted on coming, apparently. Said he had something to say to the judge." Before Daniel could process this, the courtroom doors opened and they were ushered inside. The room was smaller than Daniel had expected, more intimate somehow, which made it feel even more dangerous. Wooden benches, an American flag, the judge's bench looming over everything like a throne. And there, on the opposite side of the aisle, sat Nina Whitmore. Daniel had only seen pictures of her before, surveillance footage on Mark's videos where she was usually mid-rage, her face twisted with cruelty. In person, sitting calmly between her two lawyers in an expensive navy suit, she looked nothing like a monster. She looked like a professional woman in her 40s, perfectly put together, the kind of person you'd trust to run a PTA meeting or organize a charity drive. Her dark hair was styled elegantly, her makeup subtle, her expression one of wounded dignity. The mask was flawless. Her eyes found Daniel across the courtroom, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. The look she gave him was pure hatred, a promise of vengeance that made his blood run cold. Then she turned away, whispering something to her lead attorney, and the mask was back in place. Lawrence Blackwell sat in the front row behind his daughter, a silver-haired man in his 70s who radiated power and old money. His presence was clearly meant to intimidate, to remind everyone that they were fighting not just Nina, but an entire empire of wealth and influence. Judge Harold Morrison entered, and everyone stood. He was exactly as Jennifer had described. Late 60s, stern expression, no-nonsense demeanor. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and surveyed the courtroom with eyes that had seen countless family tragedies play out and had learned to stay detached from all of them. Case number 2025 FC 8847, the bailiff announced. Emergency custody hearing regarding minors Katie and Nora Whitmore. Petitioner Nina Whitmore versus respondent Daniel Hayes. The hearing began with Nina's lawyers going first, as was their right since they were technically the petitioners trying to regain custody. The lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Thornhill, presented their case with surgical precision. She painted Nina as a devoted aunt who'd taken in her sister's orphaned children and raised them for 4 years despite financial and emotional strain. She produced the character witnesses, neighbors who claimed the girls always seemed well cared for, a pediatrician who'd seen them years ago and found no signs of abuse, the social worker whose brief visit 3 years prior had concluded everything was fine. Your Honor, this is a case of a well-meaning but misguided stranger who overstepped his authority and essentially kidnapped 2 vulnerable children based on unfounded accusations. Mr. Hayes found the girls outside on a cold night and immediately assumed the worst. He never attempted to contact their legal guardian or proper authorities. He simply took them, and he's been holding them ever since under the guise of protection. Patricia's argument was elegant, persuasive, devoid of the actual truth. She made Daniel sound like a dangerous zealot and Nina like a victim of false accusations. When she finished, Judge Morrison looked thoughtful in a way that made Daniel's stomach churn. Then it was Marcus Chen's turn. Your Honor, the reason Mr. Hayes didn't contact Nina Whitmore is because she's the one who threw these children out into a blizzard on Christmas Eve and told them not to come back. That's not an allegation. That's documented fact. Marcus pulled up Mark's video on a laptop connected to the courtroom screen. This video was taken by Nina Whitmore's husband, Mark Whitmore, in their home on December 23rd. I'd like the court to watch it now. Patricia Thornhill was on her feet instantly. Objection. Without proper authentication and chain of custody, this video is inadmissible. We have no way of verifying when it was taken, where it was taken, or whether it's been edited. I have the witness who took the video here to authenticate it, Marcus said. Mark Whitmore is prepared to testify. Nina's head snapped toward the back of the courtroom, her composure finally cracking. Mark sat in the last row, his face pale but determined, and beside him sat a boy about Eli's age with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. The boy stared at his mother with an expression that was equal parts fear and resolution. Judge Morrison considered. I'll allow preliminary viewing pending authentication. Proceed. The video played on the screen, Nina's voice filling the courtroom with its casual cruelty. Every word was a knife, every threat a damning piece of evidence. The lawyers, the judge, even the bailiff watched in growing horror as Nina berated 2 small children and then literally told them to leave her house and freeze to death for all she cared. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Your Honor, I have 46 more videos like this one, Marcus said quietly, documenting 4 years of systematic abuse, but I think this one makes the point clearly enough. Nina Whitmore is not a devoted aunt. She's an abuser who finally went too far, and Mr. Hayes saved these children's lives. Patricia Thornhill recovered quickly, switching tactics. Your Honor, even if we accept this video as genuine, which we don't, it shows a single moment of frustration after years of caring for difficult children. Every parent has moments they're not proud of. This doesn't constitute a pattern of abuse. I have medical records, Marcus countered. Detailed documentation from Dr. Sarah Okonkwo showing malnutrition, evidence of repeated physical abuse, scarring consistent with long-term torture. These children were being systematically starved and beaten. The medical evidence doesn't lie. Back and forth they went. Arguments and counter-arguments, each side trying to shape the narrative. But Daniel could see the judge's expression shifting, could see doubt creeping into his stern features as the weight of evidence accumulated. The medical reports were particularly damning. Even Nina's expensive lawyers couldn't explain away the malnutrition, the healed fractures that had never been properly treated, the psychological trauma. Then Marcus called his first witness. The state calls Mark Whitmore. Mark walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, like the weight of his choices had physically aged him. After being sworn in, he sat down and finally met his wife's eyes across the courtroom. Nina's face was stone, but her hands gripped the table in front of her hard enough that her knuckles went white. Marcus led Mark through his testimony with careful precision. Yes, he'd taken the videos. Yes, they were unedited and genuine. Yes, he'd witnessed years of abuse and stayed silent out of fear and cowardice. His voice shook as he described watching Nina lock the girls in the basement, watching her withhold food as punishment, watching her strike them for minor infractions. He admitted he'd sometimes sneak them food when Nina wasn't looking, had sometimes left doors unlocked so they could escape their prison, but had never done enough to actually stop the abuse. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" Marcus asked. "Because I was afraid," Mark said simply. "Afraid of my wife's rage, afraid of her father's power, afraid of losing my son. I told myself the girls would be okay, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that I was protecting my own child by staying quiet. I told myself every lie I could think of to avoid doing the right thing. And then on Christmas Day, when I realized Nina had sent them out to die and was happy about it, I finally understood that my silence made me complicit, that I'd been failing my own son by teaching him through my actions that you can watch children suffer and do nothing, so I decided to stop being a coward." Patricia Thornhill's cross-examination was brutal. She implied Mark was lying to gain advantage in his divorce proceedings, suggested he'd doctored the videos to frame his wife, questioned his credibility as someone who admittedly stood by during alleged abuse. But Mark held firm, his voice growing stronger as he refused to back down from the truth. Then something unexpected happened. Mark's 12-year-old son, Jeremy, stood up from his seat in the gallery. "I want to talk to the judge." Judge Morrison looked startled. "Young man, this is not—" "Please," Jeremy said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please, I have to say something. About my mom, about what she did." Nina's face went from pale to white. Patricia Thornhill tried to object, but Judge Morrison held up a hand. "Approach the bench, son." Jeremy walked forward on trembling legs, and suddenly Daniel understood why Mark had brought him. This wasn't just about Katie and Nora anymore. This was about all the children in Nina's orbit, about breaking the cycle of abuse before it spread further. Judge Morrison spoke to Jeremy gently. "What's your name?" "Jeremy Whitmore, sir. Nina's my mom." "And you want to tell me something about this case?" "Yes, sir. About what my dad said. It's all true. My mom did those things to Katie and Nora. I saw it happen, but nobody's talked about what she did to me." The courtroom went absolutely still. "What did she do to you, Jeremy?" the judge asked quietly. Jeremy's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word rang clear. "She didn't hit me or lock me in the basement like she did to them. But she was mean, really mean. She'd tell me I was stupid or worthless. She'd take away my food if I made her mad. She'd lock me in my room for hours if I didn't do exactly what she wanted. And she told me that if I ever told anyone, she'd do to me what she did to Katie and Nora. That I'd end up in the basement too. So I stayed quiet and tried to be perfect so she wouldn't hurt me." Tears streamed down the boy's face. "When Katie and Nora disappeared, I heard my mom laugh about it. She said they'd probably frozen to death and good riddance. That's when I knew I had to tell someone, Because if she could be happy about two little kids dying, then she's not a good person. She's not a good mom. And I don't want to live with her anymore. I want to live with my dad, where it's safe. Nina surged to her feet. That's not true. Jeremy, honey, you know that's not... Sit down, Ms. Whitmore. Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. Nina sank back into her chair, her perfect mask finally shattered, her face twisted with rage and panic in equal measure. The judge turned back to Jeremy. That was very brave, son. Very brave. You can return to your seat. As Jeremy walked back to his father, Mark reached out and pulled his boy close, both of them crying now. Daniel felt Eli's hand slip into his, felt Katie and Nora pressing against his sides from where they sat in the row behind him. His own vision was blurry with tears he didn't bother to hide. Judge Morrison looked at Nina Whitmore with an expression of pure disgust. Counselor, he said to Patricia Thornhill, does your client have anything to say in her defense? Because right now I'm having a very hard time seeing any reason why these children should be returned to her care. Patricia conferred with Nina in urgent whispers. Lawrence Blackwell leaned forward, clearly trying to coach his daughter, but the damage was done. Jeremy's testimony had broken open the case in a way no amount of legal maneuvering could repair. A child had looked at his own mother and chosen truth over fear, safety over blood. Finally, Patricia stood. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence and requests time to gather evidence refuting these allegations. This is clearly a coordinated attack by her estranged husband and... Enough. The judge's voice was tired. I've heard enough. I've seen the videos, reviewed the medical evidence, and listened to testimony from 3 children who all describe the same pattern of abuse. This isn't a he said, she said situation. This is overwhelming evidence of child endangerment, abuse, and neglect. He turned his attention to Daniel. Mr. Hayes, you violated proper procedure by not immediately contacting authorities when you found these children. Under normal circumstances, that would be grounds for removing them from your care. However, these are far from normal circumstances. You acted to save their lives, and the evidence suggests you were right to do so. The girls have thrived under your care in the few weeks they've been with you. They're gaining weight, healing emotionally, forming healthy attachments. Daniel held his breath. But, the judge continued, emergency foster placement is meant to be temporary. The question before this court is what happens next. Ms. Walters, what is the state's recommendation? Jennifer Walters stood from where she'd been sitting behind Marcus. Your Honor, the state recommends permanent placement with Mr. Hayes. He's completed all required training, passed background checks, and demonstrated his ability to provide a safe, stable home. The girls have explicitly stated they wish to remain with him, and separating them at this point would cause additional trauma. We support Mr. Hayes' petition for permanent custody. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. And what about you, Mr. Whitmore? What are your intentions regarding your son? Mark stood, clearing his throat. I'm filing for divorce and sole custody, Your Honor. I'm also prepared to testify in any criminal proceedings against my wife if the state chooses to press charges. The state will be pressing charges, a new voice said from the back of the courtroom. A woman in a prosecutor's badge stepped forward. Based on the evidence presented today, we'll be filing charges of child abuse, child endangerment, and attempted murder. Ms. Whitmore will be taken into custody immediately following this hearing. Nina made a sound like a wounded animal. Her lawyers surrounded her, speaking in urgent tones, but there was nothing they could do. The videos, the medical evidence, the testimony from 3 different children, it was insurmountable. Lawrence Blackwell stood, his face purple with rage. This is a travesty. Judge Morrison, you're making a terrible mistake. My daughter is innocent, and I will use every resource at my disposal to... To what, Mr. Blackwell? To intimidate witnesses? To manipulate the justice system? I suggest you sit down before I hold you in contempt. The judge's voice was ice. Your family's money and influence hold no weight in my courtroom. The only thing that matters here is the welfare of these children, and the evidence is clear that your daughter has systematically harmed them. He turned back to Daniel. Mr. Hayes, I'm granting you permanent custody of Katie and Nora Whitmore, contingent on continued cooperation with the state and regular check-ins from Ms. Walters. The girls will remain in your care while Ms. Whitmore faces criminal charges. If you're found to be unfit at any point, this decision can be revisited, But based on everything I've seen today, I believe these children have found the family they deserve." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and just like that, it was over. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Behind him, Katie and Nora were crying, clutching each other. Eli was whooping with joy. Marcus was grinning and extending his hand for a congratulatory shake. They'd won. Against all odds, against money and power and influence, against a system that should have been rigged against them, they'd won. Nina was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally destroyed completely. She screamed at her father, at her lawyers, at Daniel, promising revenge and ruin. But her words were empty now, powerless. She'd been exposed for what she really was, and no amount of money could erase that truth. Lawrence Blackwell followed his daughter out, shooting Daniel a look of pure venom. But even that didn't matter anymore. The fight was over. The children were safe. Outside the courthouse, Mark Whitmore approached them, Jeremy hovering nervously at his side. "Mr. Hayes, I need to thank you. I need to, for everything. For pushing me to do the right thing, for showing me what courage looks like." Daniel shook his hand. "You showed up when it mattered. That's what counts." Jeremy looked at Katie and Nora shyly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't help you before. I was scared." Katie surprised everyone by hugging him. "You helped us today. That's what matters." The six of them stood together on the courthouse steps. 2 fathers, 4 children, a family forged through trauma and choice and love. Not related by blood, but bound by something stronger. By the decision to protect each other, to fight for each other, to show up even when it was hard. Marcus Chen had one more piece of news. "Mr. Hayes, there's something else you should know. The state conducted a full investigation into the girls' background after the emergency placement. They located the trust fund their parents established before their deaths. Nina never filed proper guardianship papers, so she never had legal access to it. The fund has been sitting untouched for 4 years, accumulating interest. Now that you have custody, that money transfers to you to be used for the girls' care." Daniel stared at him. "How much money?" "Approximately $470,000. The world tilted. "What?" "The girls' parents were successful before they died. They wanted to make sure Katie and Nora would be taken care of. Nina either didn't know about the trust or couldn't access it without proper legal guardianship. But now that you're their legal guardian, the money is yours to use for their benefit. Education, medical care, living expenses. Whatever they need." Daniel looked at Katie and Nora, at their thin frames still recovering from years of malnutrition, at their faces marked by trauma but lit now with hope. Their parents had tried to protect them even in death, had left them resources that Nina had never been able to touch. One final gift from people who'd loved them enough to plan for a future they wouldn't be there to see. "We can fix the house," Eli said excitedly, "and buy bunk beds and get new clothes and make sure Katie and Nora have everything they need to heal," Daniel finished, his throat tight with emotion. "Your parents loved you so much," he told the girls. "They wanted you to be okay. They wanted you to have a good life. And now you will." That evening, back at their small house that wouldn't be small for much longer, Daniel gathered all 3 kids in the living room. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, lights twinkling even though it was late January now. They'd kept it up as a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of the night that changed everything. "I want to tell you all something," Daniel said, looking at each child in turn. "When your mom died," he said to Eli, "I thought our family was over. I thought it was just going to be you and me, struggling through, trying to survive. I never imagined we'd be here, the 4 of us, together." He turned to Katie and Nora. "And you two, you've been through hell. You've been hurt and scared and made to feel like you don't matter, but you do matter. You matter so much. And I want you to know that this isn't temporary anymore. You're not foster kids or emergency placements or any other label. You're my daughters, for real, forever. If you'll have me as your dad." Both girls launched themselves at him, crying and laughing at the same time. "We already think of you as our dad," Katie said through her tears. "From that first night when you promised we were safe. We knew." Eli joined the group hug, and for a long moment, the 4 of them just held each other. A family made not by biology, but by choice, by love, by the decision to show up for each other when the world tried to tear them apart. Later that night, after the kids were finally asleep, all three of them piled together in Eli's room because they still felt safer that way. Daniel stood at the window looking out at the snow-covered street. He thought about Sarah, about how proud she'd be of the family they'd become. He thought about Katie and Nora's parents, about the trust fund they'd left to protect their daughters, even beyond death. He thought about Mark Whitmore, finding his courage when it mattered most. He thought about Jennifer Walters and Marcus Chen and Dr. Okonkwo and all the people who'd helped make this miracle possible. But mostly he thought about a Christmas Eve night when he'd almost kept driving, when he'd almost not stopped for what looked like shadows on the roadside. How close they'd all come to a different ending, a darker one, where two little girls froze to death and a broken family stayed broken forever. Sometimes Daniel realized the difference between tragedy and miracle was just the choice to stop, to see, to care, to act even when action seemed pointless or dangerous or impossible. He'd stopped that night because Eli had seen something and insisted they check. He'd fought for the girls because walking away felt like betrayal. He'd kept his promises because his word was all he had to give them. And somehow, impossibly, it had been enough. In the morning, they'd start planning their future. Therapy for the girls to help them heal, repairs for the house to make it a real home. Enrollment in school so Katie and Nora could catch up on the education they'd missed. All the practical steps that came after the dramatic rescue. But tonight, Daniel allowed himself to simply feel grateful. Grateful for 3 children sleeping safely under his roof. Grateful for a system that had ultimately worked despite its flaws. Grateful for people like Mark who'd found their courage, and Jennifer who'd believed in him, and Marcus who'd fought for free because it was the right thing to do. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings and families built from broken pieces. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walters. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of cases, but I've never seen anyone fight for children the way you fought for those girls. You didn't just save their lives. You gave them back their childhood, their future, their ability to trust. That's the real miracle here. Thank you for reminding me why I do this work." Daniel read the message 3 times, letting the words sink in. He hadn't thought of himself as a hero or a miracle worker. He'd just been a man who'd stumbled across children in need and couldn't bring himself to walk away. But maybe that's all heroism really was. Ordinary people making the choice to do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. He walked down the hall to check on the kids one more time before trying to sleep. In Eli's room, all 3 of them were tangled together like puppies, blankets kicked off despite the cold, lost in the kind of deep, peaceful sleep that only came when you finally felt safe. Katie's arm was thrown over Nora's shoulders. Nora's hand clutched the stuffed bear Eli had given her. Eli sprawled on his back, mouth open, completely at peace. His children. His family. His impossible, miraculous, hard-won family. Daniel pulled the blankets back over them, kissed each forehead gently so as not to wake them, and whispered the words he said every night. "Sweet dreams. You're safe. You're loved. You're home." And for the first time in 2 years, Daniel Hayes felt like he was home too. Not just in a physical building with walls and a roof, but in the deeper sense of the word. Home is a place where people chose each other, where love wasn't contingent on biology or circumstances, where broken things could be mended and lost things could be found and families could be built from the wreckage of trauma. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. Katie and Nora would need years of therapy to process their trauma. There would be bad days and nightmares and moments when the past tried to drag them back. Nina's trial would mean more court appearances, more testimony, more reliving of terrible memories. The girls would have to learn how to be children again, how to play and laugh and trust without waiting for the other shoe to drop. But they'd face it together, as a family. With the resources their parents had left them, and the love Daniel and Eli offered freely, and the support of a community that had finally, belatedly, shown up to help. Outside, snow began to fall again, just like it had that Christmas Eve night that changed everything. But this time the snow felt different, not threatening, but peaceful, a blanket settling over the world, making everything clean and new. Daniel thought about calling it a Christmas miracle, but it was late January now. The holiday had passed. The decorations would come down soon. Life would return to normal, or whatever counted as normal for their patchwork family. Maybe it wasn't a Christmas miracle after all. Maybe it was just what happened when ordinary people refused to accept cruelty as inevitable, when they fought for justice even when the odds were stacked against them, when they opened their homes and hearts to children who needed saving. Maybe the real miracle was learning that families weren't defined by blood or biology or legal documents, but by the promises we make and keep, by the children we choose to protect, by the love we give freely even when we have nothing else left to give. Daniel Hayes had stopped on a snowy road on Christmas Eve because his son asked him to. He'd fought an impossible battle because two little girls deserved safety. He'd risked everything because some promises were worth keeping, even when keeping them might destroy you. And in the end, he hadn't been destroyed. He'd been rebuilt, stronger than before, part of something larger than himself. A father to 3 children who needed him. A family forged in the fire of trauma and tempered by love. A miracle that was really just the culmination of 1,000 small choices to do the right thing, even when the right thing was terrifying. As Daniel finally climbed into bed, exhausted but content, he thought about the road ahead and all the challenges still to come. But he also thought about 3 children sleeping peacefully down the hall, safe and loved and home. And he smiled, because sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sent you exactly what you needed when you needed it most. Sometimes broken people found each other and built something beautiful from their shattered pieces. Sometimes love was enough, even when logic said it shouldn't be. Sometimes, against all odds, impossible families survived and thrived and became the greatest miracles of all. In the morning, there would be breakfast to make and therapy appointments to schedule and a million practical details to manage. But tonight, for this one perfect moment, there was just peace and gratitude and the profound satisfaction of promises kept. Daniel Hayes had found 2 starving girls on Christmas Eve. But the truth that left him stunned wasn't about what he'd given them. It was about what they'd given him in return. A reason to fight, a family to love, a future worth building. That was the real miracle. That was the truth that changed everything. And as snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in white, inside a small house with a leaky roof and secondhand furniture, 4 people slept peacefully, held together by something far stronger than blood. They slept like a family. Because that's exactly what they were.